Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, we'd like to welcome you to today's Extended Day-Ahead Market Implementation Workshop. Today's discussion will focus on CAISO resource adequacy imports. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Just a few reminders before we get started today. Today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting is intended to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep your comments professional and respectful today. Also, please try to keep your comments and questions succinct so that we are able to hear from everyone. We welcome and look forward to your engagement and participation today in today's meeting. For raising your hand during the meeting, the raise hand icon is directly on the bottom right of your WebEx screen. If you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. If you're in the room, you can either raise your hand or turn your placard up so that we can see that you have a question. There's also an Inteller transparency viewer on the bottom right for those of you online to see other attendees on the call. Be sure to refresh it prior to viewing. Closed captioning is also available on the bottom left of your screen. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making any questions or comments. And you can also send questions and comments via chat to all panelists or to myself directly. If you need any technical assistance today during the meeting, please send a chat to the event producer in Inteller Events. Just a reminder that CAISO introduced implementation workshops to walk stakeholders through the mechanics of significant changes in market functionality. All changes presented are consistent with the established tariff. They may, however, precede the publication of related BPMs, as the intent of these workshops is to give stakeholders as much advanced knowledge as possible. Questions are welcome during and after the workshop. For questions after the workshop, please use the city submission process. We'll touch on this process a little more towards the end of today's discussion as well. For today's agenda, we will begin with wrapping up questions that we weren't able to get to yesterday. And then George Angelides will take us through a congestion revenue rights implementation update. Then George will lead us through a CAISO resource adequacy imports discussion before we wrap up for the day with next steps. So with that, we'll begin taking questions. Sure. So first question from yesterday that we missed.
Before we get through the questions, I just want to do a quick summary of what we talked about yesterday. First of all, good morning, everyone, that you're present here and on the phone line. So I just want to go over a few key items that we discussed yesterday, and we received several questions on those, so maybe some of them are going to be dispersed if I spend a little bit of time to summarize. So there are a few new things that EDAM brings to the table, okay? So we have we introduced a type of transfer system resource, the type 1, that can be used for bilateral contracts between EDAM balancing authority areas by self-scheduling your rights on the transfer. Thank you so much. So this is the mechanism for having a bilateral contract between EDAM BAAs. There is no ability to use the EDAM BAA DGAP in the day-ahead market to have intertie schedules from one EDAM BAA to the other. Instead, we're using transfers, economic transfers, and that type 1 transfer for self-schedules to have the bilateral contracts. There was also a few questions. There were a few questions on today. You can bid at the ISO boundary in the day-ahead market. And what we mentioned here yesterday was that with the expansion of the EDAM area in EDAM to include additional BAAs now that join EDAM, that boundary is expanding, and you're still going to be bidding at the EDAM area boundary like today. So if the EDAM BAA, if there is no adjacency that you can bid directly to the ISO balancing authority area, but you're adjacent to another EDAM balancing authority area like Pacific Corp, then your scheduling activity will be to bid at that boundary EDAM area like Pacific Corp and tag your schedule through transfers, through EDAM transfers to the ISO balancing authority area. So we don't view this as a change per se. It's really bidding at the boundary of the EDAM area from today to going to EDAM. We also explained that when you go to real-time market, there is a restriction on using the IMBAA DIGUP for intertie schedules into EDAM BAAs. The restriction is that this is only used in the hour-ahead scheduling process, right? And then after the hour-ahead scheduling process, whatever schedule clears, that process is not further optimized in the real-time market. We're using economic transfers afterwards, and we ignore the economic transfers while we optimize the intertie schedules from EIM BAs to EDAM BAAs. So that was the HASP implementation aspect. And we want to point out that the extensive scenarios that we worked and we presented yesterday on the all intertie scheduling activities really don't bring anything new on the table. This is already activity that happens today with your tags. We simply point out how you can align your schedules in the market with your tagging activity. And we pointed out how you can minimize your financial exposure while doing so. We had some questions that we received during the presentation yesterday and afterwards, so we're going to address them now, and maybe Christina, you can walk us through those.
Thanks, George. So first we'll go to Kevin Porras in the room.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Kevin Porras, TransAlta. Yeah, I had a quick question. It's quick from yesterday on slide 27.
Kevin, is your microphone on?
Yeah, it is. Oh, is that better? Maybe I'll just bring it closer. Yeah. Kevin Porras, TransAlta. Quick question, slide 27. Yesterday, there was a discussion around the G gaps.
Right, let's find the slide.
Is it this one?
That's correct. Yeah, thanks. Actually related to something that you said, George, when this slide was up, was related to if you have import rights. That kind of started this whole conversation.
Yeah,
what was meant by that?
Let me explain a little bit about this slide. I said this is a very specific scheduling scenario where the scheduling coordinator actually has rights on the EDAM transfer between BAA, B, and A, right? And they want to exercise these rights, still have the ability to bid directly to EDAM BAA. This example is, in practical terms, represents the ISO balancing authority area as EDAM BAA, Portland General as EDAM BAA-B after joining EDAM, and the day-ahead EDAM transfer is the transfer rights that Portland General has from Onkoi, from John Day to Malin. So they're wheeled through BPA balancing authority area. And a customer that owns rights on that EDAM transfer, they have the ability to bid directly at the ISO balancing authority area in the day-ahead market. That's your green day-ahead schedule using the G gap, right? The generic gap. And then they will have, of course, to replace that schedule with a valid alternative in real time. And in this case, the interest is to use the EDAM transfer. So they will bid from, in this specific scenario, from a non-EDAM BAA to EDAM BAA-B. So that's an import there. And then use the EDAM transfer in real time. How you can do that? It's the ability that is unique to type 1 TSRs. where a participant may reserve right on these TSRs by putting a 0 megawatt self-schedule in the day-ahead market, deferring the use of the rights for real time. So when the day-ahead schedule from the GGAP clears, then they can revise that self-schedule in real time to match the day-ahead schedule that cleared on the import from the GGAP, and then self-schedule an import from non-EIM-BAAJ, in this example, to EDAM-BAAB to bridge that schedule. So you have a 100 megawatt day-ahead schedule, you buy it back,
That's perfect.
you
Yeah.
self-schedule the import, and you tag through your rights on EDAM transfer to get to BAA.
Thank you very much, George. That was very thorough. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, we have a written comment that we received yesterday from Dan Williams asking, will RUC consider a general gap bid as physical supply?
Thank you, Christina. There were several questions from Dan, and they all relate to how we treat Intertie schedules from the generic gap in RUC specifically, because we did mention yesterday that from a settlement perspective, because these schedules cannot be tagged, since the generic gap is not a valid scheduling point in real time, they look for settlement like a virtual schedule. So there is a hasp reversal that applies to these schedules, but from RAC perspective, it's still energy scheduled in the IFM, and RAC maintains all IFM energy schedules except the real virtuals. So anything that clears from the generic gap is part of the RAC solution. It's not optimized in RAC, it's fixed at its IFM schedule. Related to that question is whether these intertie resources can be certified to provide reliability capacity, which is the capacity procured by RAC. And what we said was that that's not possible because these resources will not be there for you in real time, or they're automatically zeroed out, the schedule. So there's no ability for our system to actually dispatch any capacity awards in FMM from these resources or even in HASP. So these resources will not be qualified to receive a reliability capacity awards, but the energy schedule will be there in RAC as scheduled in the IFM. I believe this addresses all the questions that Dan had, except the one.
Dan had a
see.
follow-up question asking, is the award counted as physical supply that doesn't need to be replaced in RUC the way that virtual supply does?
So no, yeah, we answered that. So
Next.
no, it stays in, and the other bullet on the reliability capacity answer, there is one about NETC that remains.
Thank you. Next, we had a question from Zach asking, can you confirm that the SC is responsible for adjusting their E-tag to reflect FMM intertie dispatch on non-KISO ties? In other words, KISO will not provide the tag update for non-KISO ties.
So on this one, I don't know if Zach is listening, but the previous answer that we provide still is valid. The ISO today is not receiving the tags. Our system does not receive non-ISO tags, so we don't have the ability to extend the solution that we provide for tags to the ISO, where we facilitate updating the tag based on the results of the Arrowhead scheduling process, and even FMM too, if it's a 15-minute schedule. We won't be able to do that for non-ISO tags, definitely for day one of EDAM, but this is something that we would like to consider as a potential enhancement further on if we work out the details of somehow receiving those tags and working with the participants and their systems to be able to have this kind of facilitation. I want to go back to Dan because he had a question that we didn't address. It says, and will KISO exports to non-EDAM BAs be subject to NET-C? I don't know what NET-C is, so if somebody can qualify.
Dan
that.
also has his hand raised, so we can also go to him to elaborate.
Okay, yes, please.
Tegan, could you please unmute Dan? Thanks.
TEA, so I understand the answer that you had for RUC and appreciate that. NETC using the net EDAM transfer constraint that can be enacted under certain conditions. And I believe the EDAM design is that that's relative to EDAM transfers to prevent one EDAM BA from sort of placing itself into a risky position relative to EDAM transfers being scheduled as firm energy going into real time. But it wasn't clear if these non-EDAM transfers, the ones that are getting scheduled out to EIMBAs or to non-EIMBAs, would get tied up in that transfer constraint if it was applied.
All right, thank you, Dan. Now I understand what you were asking. And for the remaining of the participants here, between EDAM BAAs and EIM BAs in real time, we have a process to protect the BAA from any violations in the power balance constraint of other BAAs by having this infeasibility and essentially bleeding out of a BAA and affecting other BAAs. We have a very specific mechanism in the market where we contain the infeasibility in the BAA where it actually occurs. But this is related to enforcing a power balance constraint for that BAA. So when we look at a non-EIM balancing authority area, obviously we don't optimize those areas. We don't have a power balance constraint for those areas. So this kind of protection applies only to the balancing authority areas in the market area. So I think this is what you were probably asking. I just want to make sure.
It's something different. So it's a function of specifically of EDAM prior to the IFM run, the EDAM operators, and this is in both PAC and PGE's business practices and tariffs as well, can insert a net export constraint sort of to protect their RA resources from being committed to serve in other areas. And so kind of the thought there then is you know, today CAISO has the GF and the GFP that's tied to the high priority and lower priority and you know those flavors that sort of act similarly to that RA-based export constraint. And I just wasn't sure if you had considered how those different types of schedules syncing in different areas would or would not be subject to that unique EDAM constraint.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so with reference to the net export constraint that applies to EDAM balancing authority areas, that the intent of that constraint is to limit export transfers to maintain capacity that is available in that EDAM balancing authority area to meet the RSC requirements in that area plus some margin that is assigned to that constraint. And your question is how we handle exports from that EDAM balancing authority area in that constraint. And the exports, there's a difference between the ISO balancing authority area when it comes to exports and EDAM balancing authority areas, non-ISO. All exports for non-ISO balancing authority areas, we consider them firm. For the exports out of the ISO balancing authority area, we have a different designation. We have what we call priority exports, that they have equal priority to demand. And we have lower priority exports that they have lower priority for the demand. We maintain this distinction going from today to EDAM. The specific question on how these are handled in that specific constraint, I don't have it on the top of my mind. It's a very complex constraint, and you know, we did it a long time ago. So I have to refresh my memory and go back and see, unless my fellow participants from the ISO have a fresh memory, and no, the answer is no. So we'll have to get back to you on that. I have to open my technical documents and look at the formulation to give you an accurate answer, and I don't have it on the top of my head right now. Excuse me. We'll get back to you on that. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. I'm thinking that there's a handful of these things and probably some examples that I'd like to put in written comments that I think would be relevant to the tariff clarifications, since a lot of this shows up in those clarifications, and we've got a couple weeks to write that up. So I'll try and focus some of that into there, and within that, I do want to list out just what at least we've considered as the fundamental differences between how things work today and what's being planned or proposed here. And this is all, there's a group of us who've been participating heavily in PAC and PGEs and CAISO's implementation efforts, and have been asking questions around this for the last 12 or 18 months. And this is all hitting us feeling like at the last minute, when we've been working through policy and tariff and business practices with those entities. And so I think that's just why you're getting some of this reaction. But it's probably more useful to put all that in writing and lay out, kind of what we're seeing as hurdles and process difficulties. Something simple like, dealing with how TSRs are registered versus just being able to purchase hourly transmission and flow your megawatts to the CAISO's border and get the border price. That is a fundamentally different day in the life of a trader than what's being described here, even though if you zoom out, a megawatt's being delivered to the CAISO. So that at that level, it is the same. But I'll work on that for written comments and encourage others to, I guess, do the same on those tariff clarifications.
Thank you, Don. And may I ask YT, do we have this constraint active in market simulation today? We do. So we can look at the results and get some feedback. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, George.
We have 3 remaining questions from yesterday's discussion. We have a hand raised from Hui Yuan. Go ahead. Can you try? Oh, there you go. You should be unmuted now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Hui from SCE. I have 3 questions regarding yesterday's session. First, it's about the EDAM SCOC problem formulation. So in yesterday's meeting, it was mentioned that the power balance constraint is formulated separately for each BAA, and that MLC is also calculated separately. I'm wondering if CAISO has published any technical document detailing the formulation of the EDAM SCOC problems.
Yes, I believe we have published a technical document that has the formulation of the EDAM problem and the DAME problem too. So you have 2 technical documents that describe that.
Could you share with us?
Technical. So you will find the information you're probably looking for in these documents. Now, I have to put a caveat. These are documents written by the ISO. They're not represent how exactly our vendor implements, but there is a good alignment on it. And they are, there might have been some changes in the implementation from the time that these documents were written and published, but the main elements are still valid, so they should provide a good reference for you.
Okay, so where that document is? Is in the EDAM, the website?
Let's see if we can get them, George.
Yes,
and
I
we'll
believe.
provide a link.
Yes.
George,
It's better if you can provide a link to us. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll get a link in the chat shortly.
Thank you. Okay, second question is about the D gap and C gaps. So are the D gaps and C gaps defined in the EDAM exactly the same way as they are in the West EIM?
For the EIM BAA DGAPs, the answer is yes. The non-EIM BAA DGAPs, again, yes, because you can use those both in day ahead and in real time. The EIM BAA DGAPs in HASP only, as we mentioned earlier. For the EDAM BAA DGAPs, they will be defined. So we will publish a price for those, for the DGAP ties, but you won't be able to use them as scheduling points in the market because you'll be using transfers instead. However, they will be available to be used as CRR source or sink locations as an equivalent of using a transfer location from getting a CRR from the intertie between an EDAM BA in the ISO balancing authority area. So you will have them available. We'll publish this. Just keep in mind, you won't be able to schedule in the day ahead market at these scheduling points. They're provided for CRRs.
Okay, thank you. Third question is about the EDAM phonemic model. So we currently model the Kaiser day-ahead market in our own production simulation model, but the transition to the EDAM introduced a significant change in the model. So yesterday I asked this question, and Kaiser mentioned that they will wait to publish the EDAM phonemic model during the parallel market run. That is February 2026. So
right, the issue that we're having with the market simulation is that there may be changes ongoing to that network model. So there's no point publishing it since it's not finalized. So when we go to parallel operations, it should be pretty final.
Yeah, we understand that there may be some update and some changes from the market sim to parallel run. So, but it will be too late for us to update our model in time. So I'm wondering if it's possible for Kaiser to release the interim EDAM FNM used in the market sim earlier.
And
So
I
that
assume
will
your
help
question
us to
with an NDA, correct? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, we'll take that under consideration. We need to look at our internal processes and how this aligns with our market simulation efforts, but we will consider it.
Okay, that's great. And also, could ISO also publish the corresponding PSSE off-row file along with the EDAM phonemic model, so that that will
PSSC?
yeah,
The
that
PSSC
raw file, the snapshot of the off-row. That will be very extremely helpful for us.
Yeah, this is Khalid. We'll
Yeah.
take this as an action item to discuss with our full network model team to see what we can publish now in terms of follow the process. And maybe if we can expedite that process, we will try to do that. But we cannot give you a commitment now because we have to see the whole process and what can be released now versus later. Because there is, as I said, there is a lot of information that are not confirmed yet by the some of the entities involved, and we don't want to publish information when it is not totally, in the market sim, we have less, I would say, restrictions related to the registration and the process of, the setting some parameters and all of that. So that's where people take the time to finalize and tune this, and then we will be able to publish, more, I would say, doesn't have to be the last information, but at least some dependable information that you could use.
Mm-hmm.
We will look into expediting that process, but I cannot promise you for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple more hands online, and then we have one question in the room that we'll go to after. Next, we have Rohan Chatterjee. Go ahead.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Awesome. Thank you. I had a couple of questions. The first one was related to slide 15. And if someone would please go to slide 15. Yeah, thank you. So the question here was, I was trying to understand why in FMM-RDD, the red bubbles are being referenced as TSRs instead of ETSRs. Is there a nuance over here that is resulting in these bubbles being labeled as TSRs in FMM-RDD as opposed to ETSRs? So that's my first question. I guess I'll wait for a response to that before I move on to my subsequent questions.
Yeah, these are real-time transfers that we show here. This is activity in real time. And we are concerned with the simultaneous optimization of those two constructs we saw up and down. Oh, I'm referring to TSR use.
You're referring TSR instead of ETSR.
Yeah, there was a question on that yesterday generally. So for us, for our implementation, they're all transfer system resources. I know they go with the name ETSR in real time because the focus is on the E being energy transfer system resources because they only have energy schedules. Since we don't support currently capacity transfers in real time, whereas because we support capacity transfers in day ahead, we call them TSRs in general because they can have both energy schedules and capacity products. Go with the with the color that we use here. So if you see it red, that's really a real-time transfer. So those TSRs shown there are known today as ETSRs. So it's just a naming convention, if you will.
Do you think it might be helpful for clarification if you just call them ETSRs? Because really the time frame that they are referencing very clearly, as has been shown on this slide, is FMM-RDD. So I think for clarification, if I'm understanding correctly, George, ETSRs are not going away. It's just a convention that has been adopted in this slide to show those as TSRs. But if ETSRs are not going away, then I'm wondering if it would be more helpful to just have the red bubbles be called ETSRs, unless you are suggesting that capacity transfers will also be happening in FMM-RDD.
Yeah. So yes, ETSRs are not going away. They're going to be still there. These are the transfers that are used in real time. We're introducing transfers for the day ahead, EDAM transfers. So in the tariff, we separate this, the EDAM transfers and Western Energy Imbalance Market transfers. EDAM transfers are optimized in the day ahead, and they're staying fixed at their schedule, essentially from the day ahead. The only exception are the TSR type 1 transfers that you can revise the self-schedule. There is a very good description of the different types of transfers and TSRs and ETSRs that we support in the day-ahead market and the real-time market. It's in the document, the paper that we have released that goes along with all these intertie scheduling scenarios. You'll find all the information there. Looking at the slides, I suggest look at the legend. So you see that whenever you see a green TSR, that's a day-ahead transfer. Whenever you see a red TSR, that's an ETSR. It's a real-time transfer. That's why we add the legend to the slides. And we hope that this is sufficient.
Okay. So the green bubbles, the TSRs that are being referenced, those could be for energy or capacity. But
Correct.
for the red bubbles, the TSRs are basically representation of ETSRs, and those would be energy only. Is that
That's correct.
accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then you said this is explained in some paper. Are you talking about the same paper that was published or rather
Yes.
disseminated for the purposes of this workshop?
Yes, I just want to confirm that we have that published, correct?
Or was it the paper that was published earlier
Paper
this
is
year?
published. Maybe you can put a link in the chat on that one too, Christina.
Yeah, we'll
Yes,
include a link in the chat.
thank you. Yeah, and we
Okay.
mentioned yesterday that this paper also contains an appendix with very detailed settlement explanation for most of the scenarios that we presented.
Right. Okay, that's very helpful. So the next question was, this is just somewhat more conceptual and foundational, is both the paper that has been distributed as well as your verbal comments yesterday kept using a phrase known as bridging. I think for a lot of people on the call, maybe bridging might seem like a very obvious phrase, but I think it might be just helpful, George, if you could just level set and explain, like, really foundationally, what is it that you mean by the phrase bridging?
What was that term?
It was bridging.
Oh, the bridging. Okay. Yeah.
I put it in the chat.
Yeah. So this is when you connect the megawatts of your schedules to meet the commitment that was made in the day-ahead market. When you clear the day-ahead market, you have a day-ahead schedule. In most of the scenarios now, you have to connect that day-ahead schedule with the source of the energy, which could be, for example, a supply resource. So the bridging means that you will, in most cases that we presented yesterday, submit a base schedule if that's an EIM resource, right? And it could be non-participating or participating for a base schedule. So you submit a base schedule to match the day-ahead schedule that cleared the market. So if you had an import into the ISO, let's say from BPA, for 100 megawatt, it clears 100 megawatts in the day ahead. In real time, you will submit a 100 megawatt base schedule from the physical resource in BPA that provides the energy for that import to the ISO. And that's what we call bridging. You bridge your day-ahead schedule with your real-time supply. That's what is meant to be. Does this provide adequate explanation?
Yeah. So basically, the phrase bridging, if I'm understanding correctly, is synonymous with the physical resource.
Right. You can see this bridging here in this figure, where the supply resource in EDAM BAAB provides the energy for a day-ahead transfer. And supposedly it's meeting or supplying a load in EDAM BAAA. So if your load is in the day-ahead market, let's say you self-schedule it at 100 megawatts, then you also self-schedule your supply for 100 megawatts, or you bid it, and then you tag through the day-ahead transfer. And that activity that you submit 100 megawatt bid or self-schedule, we call it bridging. You bridge your schedule from the supply through the transfer to your load ultimately.
Okay, that's very helpful, Josh. Thank you. The next question was related to, I think it was slide 14. And what we were trying to understand was, or rather, I should say slide 13, was that
I have it.
When we have, when EDAM goes live, yeah, yep, that one.
Oh, that one.
If and the specific scenario that we're thinking about is an off-system, or rather a purchase from within the Cal ISO BAA. The seller would be a non-EDAM SC that is a registered SC today within the Cal ISO BAA. So it's an off-system sale, the seller being within the Cal ISO footprint, and then we are, as in Pacific Corp East BAA, is where the sale is sinking. So for the purposes of the conversation, let's say the import is happening or the transfer location is Mona. The question was on the California ISO side of the Intertie, how is that? And I should also add that in this transaction, on the Cal ISO side of the Intertie, the seller does not have a CRN. They don't have any firm rights to be able to afford a CRN. So in that scenario, the question was, how is a transfer system resource type 1 going to be effectuated if that is in fact the mechanism that is going to be utilized for a scenario like this?
I think it will be best if you send us this specific scenario in an example.
Okay.
Mail it to us so that we can go through it. I'm not sure I understood all parts of it. So
Okay.
yeah, it didn't sound simple enough to address it here, particularly when it comes to exports from the ISO balancing authority area, because we have these different types of exports like high priority and low priority. So I think it probably messes into the question that you have. So let us see it in an email. So
And
that we
just to
can analyze
clarify,
it.
please submit through a city ticket instead of email.
Oh, okay. Yeah, city ticket it is then.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that, George.
Thank you.
And then
Thank
the
you.
last question was related to TIGENs. The question was, and for the sake of the conversation, I'm talking about, let's say TIGENs, an off-system designated network resource that Pacific Corp has, let's say sitting in Colorado that we are importing into our system at say the Four Corners import location. What we are trying to understand is, would only off-system designated network resources be eligible for TIGEN registration? Or can we also request registration for off-system resources that are owned by other entities that have been undesignated for the purposes of facilitating off-system sales? Can those resources, frequent buyers, that we may be of such resources from such counterparties, can we register such resources for TIGEN registration purposes, for the purposes of establishing that custom gap point?
Yeah. So my understanding of this registration process is that the participant can register the resource as a TG, specifying the CGAP, has to work with our master file experts to define the CGAP for that resource, but this registration has to be approved also by the entity. So the entity has to verify and approve this registration for a TG, that it meets the DNR tariff requirements, and there is a contract in place, demand obligation for that participant to serve demand in that EDAM entity, Pacific Corp in your example. So I suggest you start the process early for this, because there's going to be some validation and confirmation along the way before this registration can be effective in the master file.
Got it. All right. Thank you, George. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question online from Stuart Kelly, and just a reminder to folks, try to keep your questions to a 2-question minimum so we can hear from everyone today. Thank you.
Morning, George.
Maximum.
Good morning, George. You mentioned this, and I appreciate you guys doing this, but this morning you mentioned about bidding at the EDAM boundary in your summary, and this was a non-CAISO EDAM boundary. Can you just restate when you can initially bid at a non-EDAM boundary? Because my understanding is initially you can only economically bid at a non-EDAM boundary if you're a designated network resource. However, you can continue to bid at the CAISO boundary as you did, as you do today. Can you just restate exactly when you can bid at the known EDAM boundary, economically bid?
That's correct, Stuart. We had a table that.
Yeah, I saw the table. It was just in
That's
the
showing
comments.
participation.
Yeah.
Is it this one? I think it's this one. So indeed, for ISO Intertie's participants can submit economic bids even from system resources, any Intertie transactions. It's just that this is not supported for an EDAM Intertie to an EDAM BA. That's where this functionality is restricted to TGs only.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that everyone's clear. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, we have a question in the room from Carrie Bentley. Go ahead, Carrie.
This is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. It's actually nice Joanne's in the room. Is Joanne still in the room? Yeah, good. All right, so this actually is a question for Khaled and Joanne. I have a little bit of a build-up. So it's clear the CAISO has done a lot of work on this, but it's also clear that you're light years ahead of stakeholders in understanding it. And that's because even though this was in the tariff, this wasn't designed in a stakeholder process. The impact of that is twofold and I think really important. One, you guys didn't benefit from stakeholder feedback on all of this initially. You didn't get to hear whether this is the direction they wanted for their energy market. And then I think maybe even worse, we didn't really know this was happening until August. So no one has really been able to assess their commercial impact, assess how they need to change their own processes. Really is the last minute that we're understanding this, as I think you could tell by all the questions you're still getting. So my question for you two is, you know, if all stakeholders come to you and say, we're just not ready, we just aren't, I'm sorry, we're trying our best. You could tell we are trying our best to understand, but we're not ready. Can this be delayed until after EDAM implementation? And if that's possible, how can stakeholders communicate this to you?
Gary, thank you for bringing this, because the way I'm seeing these questions are more actually trying to understand the changes. And George tried to summarize that there are basically 3 changes that are impacting the stakeholders or the participants or the scheduling coordinators. Everything, most of those scenarios that George went through it, which sounded to be a little bit more involved in terms of activities, those are things that the scheduling coordinators are doing in the real-time market for the WEIM. So when we go to the EDAM, we are trying to reflect the same actions that are being done in the WEIM, how those will look like in the EDAM. We're not trying to invent anything new. The new invention of the, if you want to call it new, which is, again, it's something that the WEIMs right now, they are practicing it. It's not new to the WEIM entities when we extend to the EDAM. It is new to the California ISO participants that are bidding at our scheduling point, California scheduling points. That is the only thing that we are saying. Instead of now bidding at a scheduling point, and we are representing your location there for purposes of power flow and all of that, we want you to tell us where you are bringing that energy from. If you know the balancing area, you don't have to know the exact generator, just the balancing area, which sometimes you know, then you can provide that information. If you don't know that balancing area even, we have created a concept called generic gap. That's a new concept, the generic gap itself. Now, there may be some financial, and that's what we were trying to get to today, is that what does this mean in terms of aligning this practice of DGAP tie into, for example, what does that mean in terms of hedging yourself against congestion, and in terms of the pricing formation of what price that you will be looking at. Instead of looking at a price at a scheduling point, 1 P node, let's say, you are looking at a price that is a DGAP tie. And we will publish those DGAP tie, and we will publish the price at that scheduling point. But what's beneficial is the price that you're going to be cleared on. As I said, today's objective was for us to continue that and say and prove that, okay, from a financial point of view, that's also not a big change or doesn't introduce a big risk. And the question is, how is that? How do a market participant or a scheduler reduce or mitigate any financial risk in terms whether it is acquiring CRR or in terms of how do I do my scheduling and what are the changes that I need in my systems? I mean, the whole thing here is to go through the scheduling because some practices, it is not where it's not how you secure the energy or how you have your contracts written. It is more of when you put that schedule in the day-ahead market, you just need to add this additional information if you know it. If you don't know it, we also gave you a mechanism to also put that information in a general way. That's the change here.
So, Khaled, I appreciate that you are providing all this information and making it so that we could begin to assess the price impacts. But we have 10 years of trading on interties at a single price, and this will be disruptive to bidding practices, to hedging, to bilateral contracts. And I completely appreciate you're going to go over that today. My question is, if stakeholders come back to you and say, we disagree, it's simple, we disagree that this is just, business as usual for the most part. My question is, can you delay it and not delay EDAM? Is that possible to separate them?
What we would like is really written comments of why this is disruptive and give us a chance to explain our opinion as well. And we are ready to go into maybe a deeper discussions related to that. But for the time being, let's try to help everybody understand the full story. And then we can, we can see where we are related to that. But this concept that George is going through is a concept that we already went through when we did the WEIM. And if we do something different, actually, in EDAM, it will be inconsistent with how we're doing the WEIM design. That's the point that we're trying to get across, but it's coming as like we're trying to add complications, but we are not. We are trying to be consistent with what we are doing with the WEIM.
Yeah,
I appreciate that, but Joanne, maybe you could help me out here. I really just want to know, can we do this? Because WPTF completely intends to push for that if it's possible. We don't want to blow up EDAM, but we are also really worried for our members. And
Understood.
Thank you.
I don't think it's possible, but we would have to discuss further, Carrie. But I think to Khaled's point, if I could offer, if we can understand the impacts a little bit more and then work with stakeholders to figure out how can we mitigate those impacts as much as possible or help lessen them or help, provide support where needed to help transition. So if we can, maybe we can work with you and others on what those are so we have a good understanding and can dig into them. But I appreciate the comments.
Yeah, and hopefully we can focus on trying to understand, as I said, the full thing end to end. And then after that, we can talk about it. Is it difficult? Is it impossible? If it's impossible, it's impossible. But I don't think this is the feeling that we're trying to get is this really something impossible? Or it's actually not a big change. Right? We're trying to find out that. We didn't say that.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something too. The Intertie scheduling scenarios that we presented, they're not really dependent on the specific modeling change to have the distribution of the Intertie schedule to a DGAP instead of an Intertie scheduling location. The scheduling scenarios will still play out the same way. Those two are not connected. And the scheduling scenarios represent scheduling activity and tagging activity that is in place today. So let's keep those things separate. One is a modeling change. The other is something that is already in place today. That's how participants stack their schedules through intermediate BAS and such. It's time to leave the Q&A sessions from yesterday and focus on today's activities.
I just want to also say there's obviously more questions, and I think there's more questions online, but I think, George, if we want to get through this next phase of material, then we can come back
Yes.
to other questions at the end, because I think this next phase or presentation may help alleviate some concerns.
Thank you. Because otherwise you'll be very hungry by 1 p.m. All right. So I want to give you a implementation update on the CRRs from what we said last time in the last workshop in August. Many things have happened. We're going to go through the friendly reminders, if you don't mind. Okay. So, as you know, March 1st, we're rolling out EDAM. So master file and the database for the market will have the new data structures defined, specifically all the gap tie combinations that we talked about yesterday. Okay. Of course, before May 1st, all the CRRs that are procured, because there's almost a 2-month delay, there's a 6-week process for procuring monthly CRRs. So the CRRs for the first 2 months after March 1st for April and May will be using the existing Intertie scheduling point as CRR source and sink. What happens after May 1st, when we have the new production data in the system, that will be also accessed by the CRR system. And all the CRRs that will be procured going forward after May 1st will be using the same gap ties that the IFM will be using in the EDAM solution. So we'll have a full alignment between the CRRs and what IFM is scheduling. So the participants will be able to get a full heads for their day ahead schedule. We accomplish this by circumventing a system limitation that is currently in the CRR system that requires a single scheduling point per intertie, and we have now to support multiple gap ties for the same intertie. So what we're doing, or what we will do, is we're going to fold the tie ID into the scheduling point into the gap and come up with unique gap ties as being the scheduling point for CRR sources and sinks. So we'll be able to achieve full alignment with the IFM. Now, for the CRRs that are already, or that will be already procured until we do this, which are the annual CRRs for 2026 and the monthly CRRs for May and June, we will migrate those CRRs from the current Intertie scheduling point to the nearest, electrically nearest EIM BAA gap. And this is a process that we use today. So we'll leverage the existing process for that migration. The process that we use today, when we retire a scheduling point, we move the CRRs from that scheduling point to the electrically closest scheduling point. We have done this a few times in the past. So we're going to use the same process. We're not inventing something new. I want to describe all this a little bit graphically to get it clear. So this is our CRR implementation line. So as I mentioned, until May 1st, the system has the Intertie scheduling point in the data set. So that is going to be used until that time. And then from May 1st going forward, we have the new system that supports EDAM. So we have the multiple gap tie combinations that will be used in EDAM. The CRRs for March and April are already existing before that time. So they're using the existing Intertie scheduling point, the same with the annual CRRs for 2026. Now, because of the time delay in procuring the monthly CRRs, sometime in March, we procure the CRRs for May, and sometime in April, the CRRs for June. These are procured based on the existing data before the transition. So they will be using the Intertie scheduling point. Starting from May going forward, sometime in May, we'll procure the monthly CRRs for July. And also the process will start for the 2027 CRRs. This will be using the new database, the new concepts, and the EDAM gap tie combinations. And going forward, all the CRRs from that point on will be using the new system. Will have full alignment of these CRRs with what IFM schedules will be. For those 2 months, May, June, and for the annual CRRs, we will need to migrate those from the Intertie scheduling point to the closest, electrically closest BAA gap. So we'll do that for the annual CRRs. So they will be converted on May 1st to use that closest gap tie. And the March and the May and June monthly CRRs will be converted as well, so that when we run the EDAM for May and June, you'll have now alignment with the IFM schedules with those CRRs if the IFM schedules use the same gap. Now, let's look at the difference that you may have. Sorry? On the previous slide? Yeah, let's have it.
Okay, sorry, just real quick question on,
Callie
Callie
Wills,
Wills,
yeah.
WPTF. So first of all, I appreciate you guys are kind of getting rid of what I used to characterize as kind of like that funky transition period. So I appreciate that. So my question is, when you guys migrate the May and June 2026 CRRs, I think I heard you say you're going to migrate them to single gap tie, but what we talked about yesterday was each tie might end up having multiple gap tie combinations. Are you guys picking which ones you're migrating to? Do CR holders have the ability to come to you and ask for certain ones if it's all at the same tie?
Yeah, we're using the existing process for migration of scheduling points, which is basically we'll move everything from the scheduling point that is retired to the closest electrical scheduling point, and that will be the dig-up of the adjacent balancing authority area. So from Malin 5 and 101, you're going to go to the BPA dig-up.
That was my follow-up question. So are you going to let people know which DGAP tie you're going to reassign?
Of course.
Them to? Okay, so it'll be for Malin, it'll be the BPA.
Correct.
And then for the July and August 2027, when you're fully aligned.
Now you will select whatever you
want. Now
you
can pick. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and of course, we won't be able to ask the participants which gap they want because that affects the value of the CRR. So we don't want to provide issue. We don't want to have issues with that selection. And that will be a new policy. We don't want to create a new policy. We have already an existing policy for migrating to a new scheduling point. We'll use that. And it's not such a bad choice. I want to show you now why it's not a bad choice. So we number crunch some data with the shift factors out of the market simulation to show you the different shift factors that you will have from the different gaps compared to the existing ones that you have from the Malin 5 and 101. This is for shift factors from the north gaps to path 26. And it's a snapshot, as I mentioned here, because, you know, the shift factors do change. They depend on network configuration. So depending on what transmission outages are in the system, they may change. So don't take the numbers as being fixed, but they're indicative. That's what I want to point out. So you can see here how the shift factors to path 26 vary for all the gaps in the north. Obviously, the bank and TID are the tall bars because they have high electrical closeness to path 26. Everything else is pretty much in a band. This is a 10% plus minus 5% band that most of your shift factors from the gaps fall in. There are, of course, some notable exceptions. Idaho Power has quite a bit of parallel path connectivity. And Northwestern, it's a little bit more remote than Path 26, so those are a little bit lower. So our focus here is to compare all these bars with the one for the BPA dig up, which is the purple one. This is where the migration will happen. And you can see how that will compare with IFM schedules that won't be using the BPA dig up. The ones that will be using the BPA dig up, they will get a full heads. The other ones, they may have some variation. I need to explain this very carefully, and please pay attention. This is a plus minus 5%, is a 10% difference on the shift factor with this indicative data. That does not mean that you may have a 10% variance in your heads. Why? As we said yesterday, the major components of the LMP are still the same, moving around the gaps. The marginal energy cost, the marginal energy cost of the ISO balancing authority area. It doesn't matter which gap you use. The intertie scheduling limit, the effects of that intertie scheduling limit is seen in all these gap ties for the same tie. So this is also the same. It doesn't matter which gap you're going around. So that potential difference of 10% in the shift factors affects only a subcomponent of the marginal congestion component of the LMP. So it doesn't mean that you're going to be maybe potentially 10% out of your heads. That is going to be a small amount. Okay? So it only affects the physical congestion component of the marginal congestion of the LMP. The other components are still captured. So that's important to note. Well, wait, I'm not done. What I also want to point out here is we include also the existing point. You can see Malin 5N101 and the North GGAP. At some point, we're thinking that maybe going with the GGAP will be a better solution for the migration, but it's not. It appears the BPA DGAP is a good solution here. Comparing with the Malin 5N01, you can see that when you migrate from this light green bar to the purple bar, you see that your shift factors are reduced because obviously the BPA DGAP is a little bit more electrically remote than Path 26 from the Malin 5N01. You may get the impression here that your CRR, your existing CRR from Malin 5 and 101 migrating to the BPA DGAP is losing some value because the shift factor contribution to Path 26 is reducing slightly. What you have to consider is also what happens to the firmness of that CRR. So it may be reducing value, but how is it funded? It will be funded by this bar for a schedule, for an IFM schedule that is using the BPA DGAP. So even if it was at this level, whereas the 5N101, the value of the CRR, you're still getting the money that we collect from the BPA DGAP. So it may look that your CRR will lose some value, but will become firmer. At the end, you'll get the same money. So I want to point that out so that you don't fall into the fallacy of assuming that your CRR losing value. It's gaining firmness in what value it's losing. Yes, Carrie.
Callie Wells with WPTF. That's good. We get that all the time. So I just want to go back to your funding point because I thought I heard, well, I heard what you said is that you will be funded for that purple bar, the congestion from the BPA DGAP. But I want to reconcile with what was talked about in August because at that meeting, I thought the CAISO landed that any congestion given to a CRR value that's occurring from congestion outside the CAISO BA is not fully funded and it's actually zero. So is this different congestion?
No, I'm talking about congestion in the ISO balancing authority area. I was referring to that. So I'm comparing, so that you can have apples and apples. I'm comparing a CRR that was originally procured from Malin 5 and 101, which is migrating to the BPA DGAP, all right? And the participant is scheduling from the BPA DGAP now in the IFM.
Okay, but if,
or
okay,
let's say all the participants. So your CRR with that conversion is losing some value for path 26 specifically. But what I'm trying to say here is what it's losing in value is gaining in firmness because it's funded by the IFM schedules. And the IFM schedules, if you assume that all of them are from the BPA DGAP, you're only getting the purple bar in dollars from congestion revenue to fund that CRR. So even if we had migrated somehow that CRR was on green, you expect more money for its value, you will still get the purple bar. So by migrating it, it becomes firm. It may look like it's losing value, but in dollars, it's still the same dollars.
okay, so very, very simple example, just so I can wrap my mind around this. If I have a CRR sourced at a generator node inside inside CAISO, and I'm exporting at Malin, that's now going to be a CRR that's exporting at BPA. The only congestion, I know this is an extreme example, the only congestion that's occurring is that BPA DGAP. Let's say it's $5. So my CR value should be the notional value is $5. Is that fully funded or not?
There is more congestion. There's congestion. In this
No,
case,
I'm ignore all other congestion. Just assume it's just the congestion.
Let me simplify this a little bit. This migration does not solve the open issue from the congestion revenue allocation associated with the ISO. It does resolve the fact when it comes to ISO constraints and overall constraints that are exposed to the schedules versus your CRRs, that brings them in alignment. Your ITCs are the same if at Malin versus the BPA DGAP.
Okay, so that I was trying to narrow in
Yep.
on that. So if I'm ignoring away all other internal congestion, all congestion interties, the only congestion that's occurring is this new physical congestion that you guys are introducing with these DGAPs.
Is the physical congestion from other EDAM BAA
It's
constraints?
the new pricing. It's the new pricing that you guys introduced yesterday with that new congestion
It
component.
doesn't change it. This is even Malin. Malin will still, when we go live, if we were still having Malin 5 and 101, it still will have shift factors to Pac West and Pac East. That congestion is still there. All that's happening is when you move to BPA, you change the shift factors that are now impacting BPA's DGAP.
Okay,
So-
I think I have a slightly different, we can talk offline. I think it's a slightly different scenario that I'm trying to narrow in on.
And I want to make sure it's very clear is BPA, the BAA, we are not modeling those constraints. They're not in EDAM. So the only constraints that can impact the DGAP are the ISO constraints and any EDAM BAA constraints.
Okay, so the congestion component, that is that new piece that's going to potentially cause different prices at the same tie, right? All the different gap tie combinations.
Yeah.
My understanding yesterday was that congestion was from if you're importing it and it's causing congestion, let's say you're coming from BPA and it's causing congestion in PAC and it's showing up now at the DGAP.
Yeah, it's gonna
node.
be the physical flow
Yes.
constraints.
Is that funded?
That same physical flow constraints would have materialized Malin 5101. No, it is not being used to fund
Okay.
ISO because we have not closed that gap yet. That is going to be
Okay.
a different initiative that is coming for in the next month
Thank
or
you.
so.
I was trying to reconcile the funding George just referenced here versus that funding.
Yeah, he
Okay,
was trying.
appreciate it.
He was trying to focus is you're not losing anything from the ISO constraint level.
I was
You-
focusing
most
on
of-
ISO constraints.
Yeah.
Path
the-
26 constraints specifically.
Yeah,
So in
yeah.
your example, let's say path 26 is constrained, all right? And let's say you're exporting from Malin. That was your example. You're exporting out. You're exporting today from Malin 5 and 101. You have a CRR, a sink in that location. The sink is migrated to BPA DGAP. Now your export in IFM is at BPA DGAP. You're fully hedged because the funding from all the schedules at the BPA DGAP funds for the congestion in the ISO. Let's say that's the only congestion. It funds your CRR for the export and for the import as well.
So, George, I think we need to be careful with fully hedged. Yeah. Yeah.
Fully hedged for the congestion on path 26 from ISO schedule.
There you go.
Yeah, we're not solving the CRA issue yet. Yeah. No, that's too much. We're trying to solve the CRR problem.
Thank you. We have a question in the room from Kevin Porras, and then we have a couple online after.
Hi, everyone, again. Kevin Porras, TransAlta. Just a quick one. Do you guys have a timeline for when it's going to be released? Which DGAPs will be assigned to each node?
So from May 1st, all CRRs that will be procured by the CRR system will be using the IFM DGAP. Oh, we'll be using the ones that we'll publish on May 1st for production. And
So we find out on May 1st where it's going?
Are we going to, we are right now, sorry, this is James Lynn. Right now, we're in the process of identifying the adjacent DGAP that we are going to use. We will publish that out. I just not sure when we are going to publish out before the annual. I thought
We should be planning to publish it before the annual.
Yeah.
In order for people before the annual run, people understand what is the adjacent, where their CRR is going to be.
so the BPA DGAP of the adjacent BAA is not enough to say that, sister?
they want to know. So
That's not enough?
they want
Okay.
us to tell. They want us to tell them. So
All right.
we'll put a document together and get it published. I think YT already has a document. We just have to review it and get it out. We'll probably get it out in the next day or two.
Thank you. We have a couple written comments. First from Ellen Wolf asking, one moment. Apologies. Computer's freezing.
But I believe
The
for this
question, I can ask the question.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh shoot, no, I just lost it.
I have it now. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Will long-term CRRs also be migrated on this same schedule? From Ellen Wolf.
and the answer
It
is
depends on the intertie, right? So basically, we're moving that intertie scheduling point that is no longer valid after May 1st. It's migrating to the closest.
well, yeah. Also, George, the migration will also apply to long-term CRs. I think that's the
Yes, the
question there.
2026 ones and any older ones, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I showed in the slide. Right?
Thank you. Next question was from Eric Johnson asking, will participants need to change the master file to implement the intertie scheduling changes, or will the ISO align the new gap information with the current scheduling practices and scheduling points?
So our expectations is that you would have to work with MassFile because we don't know where you are getting the energy from. And so, yes, you would have to submit IRDT updating as of May 1st resources that you want to schedule on. Otherwise, you'll use the transaction ID.
Thank you. Next, we have a few hands online. First, we have Michael Kramick. Go ahead, Michael.
So unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend last night's session.
Could you speak a little closer to your mic? It's a little difficult to hear you, Michael.
Yeah, sorry. Is this better?
Yeah, that's better.
So sorry if this was already asked yesterday, but George, I just wanted to confirm, and then I do have a question / comment. So the annual auction is in 8 days. It has been delayed. What I believe you just said is any CRR that is sourced or synced from the existing scheduling points that is purchased on the 14th, or right about there, will eventually be migrated to one of these new gap tie points.
Yes, anything before May, correct. And the annual CRRs for 2026 or any older ones will be migrated to the closest gap tie.
Okay, so now my comment. The auction is in 8 days. You're expecting market participants to value these positions, and you're telling me your source or sync is going to change. You don't know what that source or sync is yet. Now, I just heard you say you may post a list, a master list, before the auction, but again, the auction is in 8 days. So what do you expect market participants to do? I mean, are we supposed to just assume that, take blind faith that the value that we actually get in the day ahead market is going to be consistent with what we think we're going to get in the auction? I mean, I can't imagine I have to imagine people are going to discount the heck out of these positions, because given the uncertainty you're introducing so late in the game. And then that's going to lead to another DMM comment that, oh, the auction values are so less than realized. What's going on? Well, you're introducing a huge uncertainty. Actually, you've already delayed the auction once, and now you're introducing a huge uncertainty that market participants are supposed to have to adjust to at the last minute. To me, this just seems, this is just this is very last minute, but I definitely think you need to release the mapping list ASAP.
We will release that mapping as we committed, but I think your question is how you intend to value the new CRRs that the system will be having available for your participation. And that's, for me, it's business as usual. How do you value your CRRs today? You have your CRR source or sink, and you value the congestion cost over the course of the CRR scope to come up with a potential value for your CRR to guide you in your bidding to acquire it. That process does not change. You have new locations, and new locations we have all the time. As the market changes, we have new entrants and changes to the model, and they happen all the time. So that process is always needing a recalibration for your valuation and your bidding process. That's business as usual.
George, this is Jeremy Malikos. I think it's helpful to note that the CR auction is going to be cleared based on the current Malin shift factors. So the annual auction is going to be cleared on our current SP definitions, right? So we're not making any changes to the auction that we delayed for 2 weeks.
For the 2027?
For 2026.
Well, for the 2026, I understand, but then we said May 1st, we'll convert them.
Right.
Well,
I think the point there is the awards that you get out of the auction that we are going to have here this next week will be migrated based on this new mapping.
Yeah. So the valuation will still be based on the existing scheduling points. Going forward from May 1st, you'll have to reevaluate where you want to acquire the new CRRs. That's
correct.
Yeah.
We have another question in the room from Callie Wells. Go ahead.
This is Callie Wells with WPTF. I just want to add on to that conversation. I think the uncertainty that Michael is referring to is the fact that the way you value CRs now is based on historical pricing. These are new pricing nodes that have no historical pricing at them. And then on top of that, they don't know yet what that new location is even going to be. So I think there's two elements of uncertainty that I agree the methodology is probably not going to change, but they don't have any historical data to look at to value that CRR and then use that to figure out how they're going to participate in the
Which is something that will happen when we start a new market.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's now on the 14th, so they're a couple days out. They just don't have any historical
Business as usual.
And we did take that into consideration when we were choosing what was the D gap. That is why we are choosing the D gap that is adjacent to the scheduling point, because then it's going to have the closest approximation to what they are purchasing today.
And I agree. I just think that the uncertainty is more on,
Understand.
We don't have any historical prices to base our evaluation of the CRRs on.
Next, we have a question online from Justin Cockrell. Go ahead, Justin. Justin, maybe double muted if you're speaking.
So, Callie, do you want to speak in the mic? Okay.
Do we have a question?
We have a question from Justin, but I think he was having trouble unmuting.
Yeah, I was. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, Justin Cockrell with DC Energy. So you're going to publish some mappings from the old intertie points to these new DGAP locations, but are you going to include with that definitions of the DGAP?
No, the definitions for the DGAP are also going to be part of the master file definition for production for EDAM. So they're not changing between the market and the CRR system. They're sharing the same definition. All we're doing is we're mapping the intertie within the gap to form a unique gap tie for using it as a CRR source or sink. But it's going to be the same definition for the gap used across the systems.
So these DGAP definitions are going to be included in what's published before the CRR auction next week?
Correct. This is the standard information on the scheduling points the ISO is using. This information exists today for our existing scheduling points, and that information will be updated for EDAM, including the EDAM scheduling points.
Okay, prior to next week.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Mohammed Al-Karawi. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Hi, George. Yeah, just a few questions, I guess. It's basically, I feel that you and Jeremy were not on the same page. So in the CRR auction in the annual CRR auction, do you mind going back one slide, I believe?
I thought we are saying the same thing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, so
Can you go back to the previous slide to slide?
So to be clear,
Yeah, this one.
The auction that opens next week is the annual auction for 2026. The auction that George is referring to on this slide is the annual 2027. So the annual auction for 2026 that opens up next week is going to be cleared based upon the current SP definitions. This new mapping that we will provide at some point is what we're going to map those awards to during this slide here that we show on this slide. So we'll be mapping to those in May of 2026. Is that clear?
I believe so, but that's not what the slide is showing. But yeah, so in the 2026 CRR auction, regardless of the season, there is not going to be DGAP.
So in this slide, you see the 2026 CRRs, right? So in this time frame,
right.
March 2026, April 2026. So these are, as Jeremy mentioned, we're in the process of having the auction next week or something. So these are going to be using the current intertie scheduling point, which will be used all the way through April 2026, right? So including those 2026 annual CRRs. In this slide, we're saying what will happen to those on May 1st. In 2026, we will migrate them to the EDAM gap tie, which is the closest electrically to the scheduling point that the CRRs will be procured for. That will happen on May 1st, 2026, right? And then from that point on, those 2026 migrated CRRs will be using the electrically closest gap tie, okay?
Okay. Okay. So then this does bring I would really love to see like when we will get the definition of these DGAPs because that is extremely important. To be honest, I wasn't very excited about the dismissiveness of this is business as usual, because the business as usual is when when a node retires, it gets mapped to a closed unit, to a closed node. It never gets mapped to an equivalent trading hub, which is what's happening in this case. A trading hub that its definition is not transparent to the market. So we would appreciate if we can get these mappings as soon as possible.
Yeah, so to clarify, we are not going to be posting these mappings next week. I don't know exactly the date on when the posting is, but to answer your question, we will be mapping these using our standard process where it still has to, we still are going to conduct a simul-feasibility test on it and move these to the closestly connected DGAP tie. So we are putting together the mapping on that. We just don't have it yet. I think the point of delaying the annual was to allow you to understand that this mapping will occur in the May timeframe of next year.
So also,
yeah, so there's basically two mappings that are important here. The first mapping is the tie to the actual DGAP mapping, and that is important just to make sure that nothing funky is happening. But what is even more important is to get what is the DGAP definition and how is CAISO defining these DGAPs.
So these DGAPs are defined today in WEIM, so that definition is not changing. It's going to have the association to the intertie. But from a day-ahead perspective, I did just go look at Oasis. We do publish day-ahead pricing for all the DGAPs today. So you do have historical DGAP pricing on Oasis. Yep.
Now, mind you, this
Okay,
DGAP
great, thank you.
price is basically coming out of the existing day-ahead market, which only has the ISO balancing authority area. So consider that in your evaluation. We don't have EDAM yet.
You don't have the EDAM constraints.
Or EDAM bids and transfers, okay? Yeah. So, but it's useful information in the analysis that leads to valuation of future CRRs.
Thank you.
All right.
Moving on to we have a couple more questions.
Oh, really? Okay.
And moving on to Hui Yuan, go ahead.
Can you please move to the next slide?
Yes. This is a slide, sorry, this is the slide that we saw a comparison between the gap shift factors to path 26.
Right.
North
On this slide, I heard that the last column of the shift factor is associated with the G-gap.
Yes.
However, I saw on the chart, the last row on the legend shows the S-gap. So will we use the S-gap or G-gap?
Yeah, let me explain that. So G-gap is the tariff term. In the tariff, we call it generic gap. In system implementation, in our business system requirements, we call it the system gap or the super gap because it's an amalgamation and a union of multiple gaps. It's stuck this term in implementation in our requirements with the vendor, but really the name as it's used in the tariff is generic gap, and we were using that throughout yesterday in the intertie scheduling scenarios. Now, these are data out of our system. So in our system, it's called S-gap, but it's really the G-gap. So in that one in particular is the North G-gap. Please excuse the data that we present out of our system, out of our database.
Okay, so that means when it goes into the production, all the generic gap will be posted as the S-gap. The name is like S-gap North or S-gap South, right?
I am not sure how Oasis is pointing out. YT, can you tell us? Okay, so I guess Oasis is using S-gap. So S-gap is a synonym for G-gap.
Okay, okay, all right, gosh, thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions online and then one more in the room.
Okay.
Next, we have Ellen Wolf. Go ahead, Ellen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, it's Ellen Wolf from Zero Consulting. George, I had a question about your characterization of the hedge being more firm or perfect in nature. It seemed like you explained the scenario with respect to somebody that's actually scheduling from the same place they have their CRR. Am I right about that? That what makes it firm is that the schedule aligns with the new CRR mapping? Or would you say that that
Yes.
firmness or
So,
perfectness is
yeah,
good
so I
even
was
if it's
making
just
an
a financial?
example.
Sorry.
So I was making an example to illustrate a point. The example was using an IFM schedule from the BPA DGAP. And in that example, you have congestion only on path 26. And let's say you only have ISO schedules, all right? And what you collect on path 26, if all the schedules are from the BPA DGAP, you collect congestion revenue on path 26 from BPA DGAP. This is what is funding the CRRs from the BPA DGAP, which will include those existing CRRs that will be migrated to that location. So in that context, I said you get a full hedge. So it's a limited example to illustrate a point. And the point was that maybe the conversion results in a reduction of the value of the CRR that you would have looking at it today from Malin 5 and 0101, but it's firm because it's fully funded with these assumptions that are made in the example. So whether you would have the old CRR if that was possible, or the new CRR, you're still getting the same amount of dollars because we only pay out the CRRs for what we collect, and we'll only collect congestion based on the BPA DGAP schedules. It was an example to illustrate, to make a point that you may think that your existing CRRs are losing value, but they actually gain firmness in the process, so they become firm. At the end, if everything is equal, you're still getting the same money for your CRRs. That was my point.
Okay, but that would hold then also if it's just a financial right and you bought a financial product and you don't have a schedule, one would expect then to get an equally high payment sort of independent of where it's mapped?
When you're mentioning financial rights, you mean the existing TOR ETCs?
No, I just mean if you're not using the right to hedge a comparable schedule, but you own the right that you've bought out of the CRR auction, for example.
So what she's asking is if I have a financial CRR, I'm not trying to use my CRR to actually hedge my schedule. I'm actually participating in the CRR as a marketer. And so the answer is yes, you are going to be migrated in the same way as any other CRR, and the CR1B will be applying the same as it does today. For whatever congestion we collect within the market, that congestion is going to be used to fund all of the CRRs at the migrated locations.
Yeah, I get that, but what I'm questioning is whether, George, your characterization of the value of the CRR remaining high, even though it's migrating.
You still get the same dollars. Whether this is a hedge for your schedule or just an economic instrument from a speculator perspective, you still get the same dollars for your CRRs, other the limited specific example that I was bringing up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we have one final question online from Dan Williams, and then we'll go to the room before George continues.
It's Dan T. One couple just real quick technical ones. So I was going to ask what the DGAPs were based on here. And so what I heard is that they're based on basically when we look at the Skittle map on a day ahead basis, just sort of whatever's showing there is what for a D gap is what would be represented here?
These are coming out of a market simulation environment. These are the D gaps that are used in that environment, which are not different than the D gaps that are used in EIM BAA, for EIM BAAs today in the WAME.
Do they represent all generation within those BAs or just the EIM participating generation within the BAs?
That I don't know at the top of my head. Do EIM non-participating generators are part of the D gap definition?
Yes, they are.
Okay, they are. So all supply locations then.
So it's kind of as close as we can get to like a representation of the full network model and having all resources modeled in that BA. Okay, that's good.
And I just want to highlight again, this is a snapshot of a particular day in the market simulation. The shift factors do change, so just keep that in mind.
And then at the August 21st meeting, you sort of mentioned that we'd have a separate discussion on how things look for the PGE COI rights, and for entities that'll be interacting with the PGE BA and using their COI rights there. Is that still coming? Because this triggers some thoughts relative to how pricing will show up for congestion on that versus other sources. But just is that another meeting that's going to come separately?
I'm not sure. Let me ask what you mean by. Are you referring to what congestion are you referring to? Are you referring to congestion on the EDAM transfer from between Portland General and ISO?
I should probably write it up as a full question because I'm trying to think through how transmission rights get value. And it's all the same, COI's all the same facility, but it feels like they're going to get valued differently if they're going through an EDAM BA versus BPA's non-EDAM BA. And I have a number of questions there, and including like whether you have to actually have rights on COI in order to get the BPA D gap, or to schedule.
I think it will be best if you send it and write it down, because when it comes to COI with this, it's quite complicated, and we did show two examples yesterday on that, of how a participant can use its EDAM transfer rights to complete this and bridge the schedule from the day ahead. And these are complex enough. So to make sure that we understand exactly your scenario, please send it in writing to us to examine it.
Okay. Yep. We'll work on working up some of those scenarios. But so the thing is, though, you're not necessarily planning on having a separate meeting to go over kind of like the PGE and PAC COI rights scenarios at this point.
We had some discussions with Portland General on this, but I don't think we plan to have a public meeting to go over specifically for this scenarios, because they're very specific to Portland General customers. And
it's fine if we're going to have it in a PGE meeting. I just wasn't sure where to expect, and we've been kind of waiting to hear.
It's in the document, though. It's in the public document we published, those two scenarios. At the end, those two last intertie scheduling scenarios, they do refer to this particular case specifically. So
okay, I'll go look at that. It was published yesterday morning, so I can only work 20 hours a day, not 24.
We were finishing writing it the night before.
I know, I'm sure it was a lot of. Truthfully, I know it's a lot of work, and look forward to getting to that point. But thank you. I'll let you keep rolling.
Just want to clarify, Christina, just for the shift factor, George, just to be specific, those are not snapshot in the sense of just 1 hour. It is actually an average over the 24 hours of the day. So we are capturing, the whole day. So it's more representative of a day, rather than an hour.
Thank you, Khaled. Do we have another question?
We just have one more question in the room from Stephen Keene, and then we'll take a short break after you wrap up, George.
Hi, this is Steve Keene from Edison. Looking at these numbers, I'm trying to understand, what this means. I kind of understand how the shift factors affect the value of the CRRs, but not not perfectly, and this is just a shift factor to one particular constraint, and there's what, 100, there's like 100 or 150 that constrain on a regular basis in the CAISO. Have you done any analysis, either using, since you say this stuff is published, the past actual values, or probably even better in market sim, to compare what the prices will be for the D gaps and how much they'll differ from that win price? And also, you said this was over an average over one day.
Yeah.
I had assumed that this was over, a longer period. So what day did you pick, and how representative is that of a longer period?
Steve, I don't know which day it was, but it is irrelevant. These are indicative data that I'm showing here to make a point. And we do have from that specific day a full spreadsheet that we extracted everything out of the market simulation system for every constraint and from every gap. I'm just showing you a snapshot to make a point for specifically the north gaps with path 26, and I have another slide for the south gaps that I'm going to go next, if it allows me to do so. Thank you. So yeah, we haven't performed this analysis over a big scope. It was just to get us an idea, to make a point here on the conversion, that the point being that the electrically closest D gap fares well for the north gap ties with a representative congestion on path 26, which is a major path on the backbone of the ISO balancing authority area. And we have the same look from the south gaps. Shift factors are negative because now you're from the south. Again, same snapshots, same caveats. And the scale is different, but it's still, everything lies within a 10% range of, in this case, your closest gap from the Palo Verde bus that is used today as a CRR sourcing is the SRP D gap. And I believe that's the dark cyan. Yeah, it's this one here. I'm good. And also in this one, we show you the Palo Verde bus that is used today and the South G gap. So again, everything falls within a 10% of the D gap that we will use for the migration. And again, that 10% is only on the marginal physical congestion component of the LNP. Don't translate it 10% on the value of the CRR. That will be wrong. Okay?
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just trying to get an understanding of what this means and how it would translate. And I'm still a little confused.
What this means is, let's say.
I understand. It's just,
oh, you
but this is like for
okay.
one day. And so I'm having a hard time trying to understand how to like expand that out. This is for one day for one particular constraint, obviously the biggest constraint, I get that, but I'm just trying to understand how to put the two together and what it's going to mean.
I can help you by saying that after your CRR from the Palo Verde bus is migrated to the SRP D gap, if your IFM schedule is also from the SRP D gap, you expect a full hedge, more or less, right?
Yeah.
If it's from another D gap, then you expect some variation, more or less within a 10% of a subcomponent of the LMP. Okay, so I'm not intentionally downplaying it, but it's not what you may gather by just looking at the shift factor differences, okay?
Right. Then I'd like to repeat the question I asked before. Have you done an analysis to see how the different LMPs at the different D gaps are going to differ from the existing one at Malin across some of the, like in market sim?
Some analysis, and we haven't completed, and we are working internally how we're going to make this terabytes of data available to you in a format that you can consume and and be helpful to you because the volume of this data is astronomical.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so just performing the analysis, yeah, computers do it. Okay, we have all these results. How do we show these results to you in a way that it will be helpful to you? So we're still working on the details on how we can do that in an effective manner, because just dumping all this data to you, it's not going to be helpful at all.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so what I wanted to say again here is that most of your south dig ups fall within that 10% range. There are some outliers, of course. Colorado is very electrically different and far, but most of them are in there. So I'm trying to reinforce the point that our selection, based on existing policy and practice, to go to the next immediate BAA dig up for the migration is not a bad choice. Okay, so this concludes the implementation update on the CRRs.
Yeah, we'll be taking a short 10-minute break before
Absolutely, we're
resuming.
going to need a short break. I'm going to need a short break before we delve into RA imports. So
we'll return at approximately 11:05 a.m. Pacific time.
All right. I think we're ready to get started again. I know we've had a lot of questions and I haven't had a chance to introduce myself earlier. For those of you who don't know me, Joanne Serena, Vice President of Stakeholder Engagement and Customer Experience. And I just want to thank all of the stakeholders that came here today in person and also everybody that's joined us virtually. We've had a tremendous amount of people attending. Yesterday, about 500. Today, closer to 400. So really appreciate the interest and the engagement by stakeholders. So a couple things I just wanted to quickly announce. I know today's meeting is scheduled till 1. We were hoping to be able to wrap up by 12 and get everybody free for their lunch. But depending on how the RA topic goes, we may need to go until 1. So for those people here in the room, we will bring some sandwiches up for food and try to have a working lunch if that's possible with everybody. I also wanted to mention that I know there are lots of really great questions and we want to answer as many as we can. And so what we're going to do is, I know we've been talking about you submit your questions through Citi. And what we're doing is we're taking all those questions and we're formulating a public FAQ document. And so we want to make those FAQs available to everybody, and we'll continue to build that FAQ document as more and more questions come in. But we also recognize that not everybody necessarily leverages Citi, and so we do want to open up our tool to allow you to submit questions similar to how you do for comments on a policy initiative. But I want to sort of clarify, we'll take those questions through that tool, not intended to question the policy, right? We are moving forward with our currently approved tariff, but we want to open up the channel so that you can submit your questions there as well as Citi. And we'll take all the questions, we'll consolidate them into our FAQ, and then we will schedule some subsequent stakeholder calls where we go over the FAQs, answer more questions, continue to build that FAQ, and provide examples as we go along. Okay, so I just wanted to make you aware that we'll do that and we'll provide some more details at the end of the call today. Okay, Christina, back to you.
Thanks, Joanne. Next, I'll turn it over to George to discuss CAISO resource adequacy imports.
imports. Oh, thank you. I didn't have that turned on. As part of the ISO array process. So scheduling coordinators, we show import array resources on their supply plans a month ahead, and then bid them in the market. And now the market is EDAM and WAME. So we'll walk through this. And we'll need to explain what are these changes are and why they're necessary because of the alignment that we expect to have between the array process, specifically for the imports, and EDAM that brings in new scheduling elements as we discussed yesterday. We have resources that provide resource adequacy either at an intertie or going now in EDAM at a physical location from physical resources. So we have some implementation changes that are required to connect now array imports, basically an import resource at an intertie with the ISO, with a physical resource or resources behind it in an EIM balancing authority area. And the same happens also in EDAM, if it's an EDAM physical resource. And this connection is required to transfer the must offer obligation to the physical resource that is required to bid in the market and provide this array obligation. We're making this change mindful of changes that may affect market participants and of course the ISO system. So we want to minimize the extent of changes to array rules. We want to leverage existing functionality, which is basically the array substitution today, that you can substitute one resource that has array obligation with another. This is limited to a resource that's affected by outages in the array substitution. We're generalizing this process to use a similar process for the array obligation reassignment, as we call it. And of course, we want to continue to support non-resource specific imports for generic array obligation showings. Let's see. So what is different with EDAM on array imports? And we have to make this alignment of the process with the new elements that the EDAM market brings in. So most of our implementation changes are centered on how we will represent these array obligations in the markets, EDAM and WAME. There are very few changes on the monthly array showing. There are some minor changes to the categories of resources that we use to support these monthly array showings, and we'll explain those. So this affects the resources that the participants will actually register in the master file to show you their array month ahead. And then when we move from the month ahead array showing process to before we run the markets, EDAM and WAME, there is a process for reassigning the array obligation from those import resources to physical resources behind that import that will provide this array obligation. And we do not consider this to be a new requirement because you will have to do this today to provide your array obligation. Today you have an intertie resource registered in the master file, and it has an array obligation. So you have the obligation to bid that resource in the market and tag the schedule afterwards. And of course, to provide the energy, you will actually have some physical resource behind it in either an EDAM BAA or in an EIM BAA or even in a non-EIM BAA. Wherever the source of this array obligation is, you will bid that resource in the market. In the case of non-EIM, you'll bid it at an intertie, of course. And you'll have to acquire transmission to get to the ISO border. You have to tag your schedule. So this process does not change. It's still there today. It's still an obligation for the participants that provide array. The process that we introduce here with the reassignment of the array obligation from imports to the physical resources is really formalizing that requirement. And we are introducing it mainly for the protection of the balancing authority area for the entity of the BAA where the supply resource is in. I need to explain this. What does it mean? So let's take the case of the array obligation being provided from a supply resource in an EDAM BAA. Okay, let's say Pacific Corp, for example, when we roll out EDAM. Today you have an import from Pacific Corp that brings in this obligation. You have an array import in the day-ahead market, all right? And because today our day-ahead market doesn't look beyond interties, we just stop at the intertie. We don't see what happens behind there. So we get the schedule, we get the tag, we're good. Now, the market looks beyond that intertie. It looks into Pacific Corp because the resources are going to be scheduled optimally in Pacific Corp. So the actual source of where the energy is coming to the ISO balancing authority area will be provided by a physical resource in Pacific Corp in this example. We want to make sure that when this scheduling coordinator contacts the Pacific Corp EDAM entity and requests for the entity to set up an RSC eligible transfer with the ISO between Pacific Corp and ISO so that that participant can tag its schedule and fulfill its array obligation, that the entity is also reasonably assured that that participant is going to bid in the market. Because they're carving out capacity, which is RSC eligible. What does this mean? That means that the entity is assuming RSC requirements from the ISO balancing authority area transferred to the entity, then becoming the entity's responsibility to meet these RSC requirements. So the entity has a reasonable expectation from the participant that is behind that RSC eligible requirement transfer to actually bid in the market and fulfill that requirement. Because otherwise, that if the participant does not bid, that will jeopardize the ability for the EDAM entity to pass the day-ahead resource sufficiency evaluation. So what we're doing here is we're formalizing a process that should be in place anyway for the participant to actually bid in the market to fulfill its array obligation. And going to the case of the EIM balancing authority area, it's similar. With an EIM balancing authority area, they don't participate in the day-ahead market, so they will have a day-ahead import into the ISO, where they meet their array obligation by participating in the day-ahead market. What do we do with that day-ahead schedule when we go to the WAME, as we saw yesterday? We mirror that import into the ISO as an export from the EIM balancing authority area with a mirror system resource. That mirror system resource has a base schedule that matches the day-ahead schedule, so it becomes an export energy commitment for the EIM balancing authority area. So similar to the previous case, the EIM balancing authority area has a reasonable expectation for the participant physical resource that provides the energy to actually base schedule in that EIM BAA to bridge it with the day-ahead schedule that cleared in the market, in the day-ahead market. If that participant does not submit this base schedule, it actually jeopardizes the ability for the EIM entity to balance their system and pass the real-time resource sufficiency evaluation. So these requirements, they're not coming out of the blue, and they're not new. They epitomize the requirement that exists today for a participant that provides RA obligation to actually be in the market, either with a base schedule in the example that I mentioned, or in the case specifically for flexible array with a bid. They have to bid in the market. And we formalize it in such a way so that this requirement goes into our cyber. If it's a must offer obligation, cyber enforces must offer obligation for array resources in the sense that if the participant does not bid, maybe they forget to bid. Cyber generates a bid on their behalf so that they can protect it against RAIM assessment. All right, so before I get into more details, let me make sure that, what's the next slide here? Okay, the next slide describes the array import today. So let's go through this to make a connection with what we have today. It's pretty much, I mentioned it already, that you have an array showing And this process does not change other than the resource that you use to show it. It's still the same. You submit it in CIRA. CIRA is our system for managing array obligations. CIRA will check for the intertie that you submit your array showing, which is associated with the registered intertie resource, and the registered attribute of the intertie shows which intertie is relevant in this evaluation. CIRA will make sure that the participant has sufficient MIC to meet its array obligation on that intertie. That process doesn't change, the same as today. And then the participant is expected to bid in the day-ahead and real-time market to fulfill this obligation. If it bids in the day-ahead market and the day-ahead market schedule clears, fulfills its array obligation, they don't have any remaining obligation in real time. If it's an EIM resource, can simply base schedule and we're out. If the day-ahead schedule does not fully clear in the day-ahead market, there may be some remaining array obligation for real time, and the participant is required to fulfill that by bidding in the real-time market. That doesn't change going from today to EDAM. It just becomes a little bit more involved, the process, and we talk about it, but let me stop here and see if there are any questions on what we're trying to accomplish here.
Thanks, George. We have one question online, and then we have one question the room will go to after. First, we have a question from Danelle PC online. You might be double muted, Danelle, if you're speaking right now.
No, sorry, I'm good. Thank you.
Could you speak a little closer to the microphone?
So my question's to Ned.
Oh, thank you so much. Next, we have a question from Stephen King. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hi, Steve Keen from Edison. I just want to follow up on something from yesterday with this. So a resource that's located in an EIM BAA cannot provide flex RA, correct?
No, because the participation is in HASP, and HASP does not have this resource will not have the ability to participate on a 15-minute basis in FMN to provide the flexibility that comes along as a requirement for the array obligation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any. Oh, we have a question from Callie Wells in the room. Go ahead, Callie.
Hi, Callie Wells with WPTF. Just a quick question on MIC. So yesterday, the conversation highlighted that if I'm if I'm importing and I'm not adjacent to the CAISO BAA, I now, instead of bid and import on the CAISO boundary, I have to bid the import at whatever BAA I'm close to.
Not exactly. We mirror it in the adjacent intermediate BAA, but you can still bid. In some of the scenarios, you can bid directly to the ISO in the day ahead.
Only if I use that gap, the generic gap.
No, we have scenarios that we saw that you can bid, let's say, from a non-EIM BAA at an ISO intertie, but then you have to bridge that schedule in real time with a transfer and a base schedule import, or if it's coming from an EIM BAA through another EIM BAA with a transfer and a base transfer to the other. Remember those scenarios? So there are.
I do. I thought there was a scenario where today I just submit an import at the CAISO BAA. Tomorrow, if there's another BAA that's between me and the CAISO, I have to actually bid at that BAA's boundary.
There are some scenarios like that. If the source is in an EDAM BAA, you cannot bid at the intertie anymore. You have to bid at your resource location. But we went through a plethora of scenarios yesterday that there were scenarios that you can bid at the ISO intertie, but then you have to bridge in real time your schedule where it comes from, or you can use the GGAP and things like that.
So the scenario where I have to now bid at another boundary, not the CAISO boundary. So if,
you're still bidding at the EDAM boundary.
Okay, so if in that scenario, or those scenarios, I know they weren't all of them, but I am providing import, or I'm providing RA to the CAISO, do I still have to have MIC? I'm now bidding at another BA boundary, but providing RA to the CAISO. Do I have to have MIC at one of the CAISO interties, even though I'm not bidding there anymore?
We'll clarify that in the next slide when we start talking a little bit about details, how this is accomplished. But the answer is yes. You will it starts with your monthly array sewing, which is at an ISO intertie, irrespective of how your scheduling is going to happen, right? So there, that intertie, you need to have make for it. Yes. And do we have any more questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions, and it looks like we have lunch being set up in the back for those of you in person.
Is it lunchtime already? Okay, so let's work through some of the details. All right. We're describing here the monthly sewing under the array process with the rollout of EDAM. To answer your question, actually. So to standardize the monthly array sewing so that it looks the same for everybody, for generic array, all right, we also want to emphasize the fact that the monthly array sewing is non-resource specific. So during your monthly array sewing, a month ahead, we don't expect for the participant to know the source of the energy. And it's not required to indicate it. All right, we only need the intertie to check for MIC. So the participant can register in the master file at the GGAP tie for that intertie, a system resource, and they can use that system resource in the monthly array sewing to show their array obligation, and the system will validate that the participant has MIC at that intertie. Okay. If it is a flexible array, it is a little different because for flexible array, we require resource-specific array sewing, so we use a TG. And that TG has a CGAP. Now that CGAP is somewhere, cannot be in the GGAP. That CGAP is either an EDAM BAA, an EIM BAA, or a non-EIM BAA. So the participant has to set this up in the master file, has to register the resource, and they have to use this in the array sewing for flexible array. It can also do generic array as well, the TG. And again, the same validation on the intertie that the participant has make on that intertie, which is associated with that TG now, will take place. And we're not changing the process for pseudo tie resources at all. That stays the same. So we standardize the process. If it's generic array, use a system resource at the GGAP tie. If it is a flexible array, you use a TG at the GGAP tie. That's how the process starts at the monthly array sewing. Then it takes on and becomes a little bit more detailed on how we possibly convert this before we're on the market. There was a question?
Yeah, I thought that I understood yesterday, which I don't claim to at all, the G gaps are not specific to an intertie, right? It's the G gap for the north and the G gap for the south.
But they're associated with an intertie to make a GGAP tie combination for a resource. So each tie has an associated GGAP, a single GGAP, either the north or the south. That GGAP tie combination will be used as attributes for a participant to register a resource, an intertie resource. An intertie resource must have an intertie associated and a gap. In this case, will be the GGAP.
Okay, right, thank you.
All right. Any more questions? No? Okay.
We did actually receive a couple of questions online. We have one question from Jamie Rose Gannon. Go ahead, Jamie.
I wasn't at the workshop yesterday, so we may have covered this. I'm a little confused with the
Could
flexible.
you speak a little closer to your mic, please?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't at yesterday's workshop, so you might have covered the flexible RA piece, but I'm a little confused because currently flexible RA, goes onto an EFC list in the annual process, and I don't believe that unspecified imports qualify as part of the flexible resource, resources. They're not included there. And I'd have to go back and recall if we even have specified imports on that list. I don't believe, but maybe somebody in the Kaiser room can confirm. So what do you mean here by a flexible RA import resource? Because we haven't identified it ahead of time that it can sell or be flexible and give it a value. How does it sell that or identify that, and how do we confirm that?
Yeah, so the TieGen that is used for the provision of flexible array is a resource-specific intertie resource that is tied to a physical resource through the C gap, through the custom gap. The custom gap points to the pricing location of that physical resource wherever it's located. Could be in an EDAM BAA, an EIM BAA, or outside of the market footprint. So that's the difference between the system resource, which is non-resource specific. The TZ points to a real physical resource, and it's actually is modeled with the technical characteristics of that physical resource, where the system resource has very generic characteristics, has infinite ramp, and there's no particular constraints, whereas the TZ is actually having potential intertemporal constraints as well. So it reflects the actual generating resource behind it. Make sense?
I still am confused. I mean, can it provide flexible RA towards meeting an LSE's RA requirements?
Yes, the TG can provide both flexible array and generic array.
And does it have to get on the flexible capacity list?
I assume so. Yes. Yes.
And so when we validate flex RA in the RA space in Sierra, it's still going to show up at T-45, T-30 as a non-specified resource.
Hold that question when we work through the slides that explain the array obligation reassignment, which in some scenarios they're reassigned to a physical resource. And in the case of flexible array, that physical resource needs to submit an economic bid to participate in the market. So it becomes really resource specific at that point.
Okay, I'll hold my question. I'm still not quite following how we would validate it at T-30, T-45. If it's not.
I will explain. Yeah, I will explain when we get to that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Steen Greenleaf. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Steve Greenleaf, Brookfield. George, thank you for all the material yesterday and today, very helpful. One kind of goes back to a general question from yesterday and follows up a little bit on some of the questions Dan asked. And it goes to kind of the setup for this. One is, let's assume for a second you have an EIM non-participating resource that is importing into California through, let's say, an EIM entity like BPA. So I understand that from yesterday and today, in the day-ahead basis, they would necessarily bid in at the CAISO tie using the gap associated with that tie. And this really goes to kind of an overarching question about just being clear on roles and responsibilities, because you talk about if that clears in the day ahead and then going into real time, identifying a physical source, but then it entails creation of, as I think you explained, mirror system resources between the EIM entity, BPA in this case, and CAISO, and also inclusion of that day-ahead schedule in the base schedule for the EIM entity. When it comes to the third-party entities scheduling that resource, obviously they're not creating those mirror system resources or including anything in a base schedule.
You're correct.
That happens today through creation of a tag they would submit to those entities, and it's the EIM entity doing that. Can you just, do I have that correct? Because you guys, okay, go ahead.
Yes, let me explain a little more. So basically, the mirror system resource is registered in the master file. We will take care of that. Our system is going to do that for used with mirroring all the day-ahead schedules so that Intertie, that they have the specific BAA gap. And
sorry, George. So the third-party entity doesn't register in the master file. That's between the CAISO and the EIM entity?
Correct. Yeah, the
Okay.
third-party entity, the only requirement is to register the Intertie resource that they will bid in the day-ahead market. Obviously, the physical resource, the EIM supply resource, that they will provide the obligation and the participation in the real-time market. And they have the obligation to base schedule that physical resource, not the MSR. The MSR is going to be seeded, the base schedule, by our system, and the EIM entity has control over it until T-55. Then we take over and we auto-mirror any changes to the day-ahead schedule through a tag change. So that doesn't change from today. And
Okay.
participants
If I can just real quick, I want to make sure I caught that. So I think you explained it with respect to the mirror system, but you did talk about submission of the base schedule. Once again, the base schedule is something submitted by the EIM entity. So
for non-participating resources, actually, we do have the ability for a base schedule coordinator to submit the base schedule for supply resources in an EIM BAA. So it could be the participant could have a base schedule coordinator assigned to it, and they can submit it, or the entity can do it on their behalf for non-participating resources. I think for participating resources, we do expect ultimately the scheduling coordinator that represents the resource to submit the base schedule for it. So this process is the same like today.
Yeah, my example was a non-participating resource. So, and that's why I just want to make sure I have a good understanding of the roles and responsibilities. So by submitting a tag, that third party is submitting a schedule on behalf of a non-participating resource is scheduling, say it's using existing rights through the EIM entity, it submits a schedule and a tag through the EIM entity, BPA in this case. BPA is the one in this case that makes sure that's reflected in their base schedule.
That's correct.
Okay, good. All right.
Thank you.
That's helpful. And let me just say that I haven't looked at the technical documentation yet, but delineation of those roles is going to be really important for entities, marketers, third-party entities, or not EDAM or EIM entities, just to be clear on who's doing what and how that's done. And then lastly, on this slide, with respect to that first bullet point and then the system resource, let's just say there's a resource that is in a non-EIM, non-EDAM BAA that intends to bid in. Let's say, once again, it's going to wheel through Bonneville to the CAISO tie. When it registers in the master file, does it use that non-EIM / EDAM BAA's gap? Or does it use the EIM entity's gap?
Yes, but not at the monthly array showing. So basically, you need two resources. You need the system resource at the GGAP to show it in the monthly array showing, because that's non-resource specific. And then before we run the day-ahead market, you transfer the array obligation from that generic resource at the GGAP to that specific resource at the non-EIM BAA DGAP that your source for the array obligation is. And we'll explain that in the next few slides.
Okay, and I think I understand that, but I want to make sure the setup for the monthly, today we have registered Intertie resources, right? What are you adding to that in the monthly showing?
So if it is from a non-EIM BAA, you can maintain those because you're going to need them in the day-ahead market. But what we're saying is that you register also a system resource at the GGAP to show your monthly array at this resource, which is like the generic way of showing in the monthly array. We want to standardize for all generic arrays, so everybody uses the same type of resource at the GGAP to show the monthly array. And that's because at that point, we don't expect you to have knowledge of where your source is. You may, in your case, do know that, in which case you have also registered in advance a resource at that non-EIM BAA DGAP that you will use to bid in day-ahead market after transferring the obligation from the generic resource at the GGAP.
Okay, Okay,
Thank
that's
you.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next, we have a hand raised in the room. Jasmine, do you still have a question?
I think I got it answered. I was just wondering to clarify. So for the system resource, they can't be at a D gap at this for the monthly showing, or would it just, yeah, would it just be at a G gap and not a D gap because it's not like an EIM resource?
Yeah, you're using the GGAP for your monthly showing, which is non-resource specific. There is no information from which specific BAA the source is going to come. That information will be declared later on before we run the market. So a month ahead, you just use the GGAP to pass the validation that you have secured MIC to bring your array obligation at that specific intertie associated with the GGAP for the resource registration that you have used.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve, is that an old hand or do you still have a question? Thanks. Not seeing any other questions, George.
Thank you. All right. If it's not clear, we're also saying that you may use multiple resources here if you're using TGs for flexible array, you can use potentially multiple TGs at the same intertie from different CGAPs to meet your array obligation. The sum of all your array obligation you're showing still has to we still have to make sure that you have the adequate MIC to accommodate all of them. All right, so this is the new element that we bring in the array import process, which is, we call it array obligation reassignment to differentiate it from the array substitution. We may leverage the array substitution existing functionality to do this. However, we want to differentiate because array substitution is specific when you have an outage at the resource that has array and then you substitute with another resource. Here, it's a more general way to reassign the obligation from one resource to another before we run the market. This reassignment and how it happens, it depends really on where's the source of the array obligation. And you use this to reassign your array obligation from your monthly showing, which you used a system resource at the GGAP, to a more specific resource now that the source needs to be designated in the day-ahead market. So if the source is an EDAM BAA or EIM BAA or non-EIM BAA, we have different paths of how this array obligation reassignment process plays out, and we'll walk through all these paths. Now, if the array obligation reassignment is not completed before we run the day-ahead market or the real-time market, depending on these previous bullets of where the source is, you may be exposed to RAIN penalties because you have to participate in one of these markets in one way or another. And if the participation requires participation at a physical resource, then you have to have the array obligation reassignment completed to that physical resource to see that that resource participates. And we'll explain in the process as we walk through where you could potentially have RAIM assessment and how you can avoid it. The obligation to tag your physical resource schedule through perhaps transfers, or in the example that Steve was bringing before, Steve Greenleaf, it's still there. That doesn't change. You still have the obligation to tag your schedule to the ISO to meet your provision of array requirements. So this is the generic view of the entire process for the array obligation reassignment before EDAM. It's a lot because it has a lot of things all together so that we can compare and explain your various choices. We're going to stupefy this and walk through each branch slowly so that we will decipher it. But from the overall look, essentially you have your monthly array showing either at a system resource at the GGAP or at the TG at the custom gap, right? If you have flexible array. The process checks for you to have sufficient MIC then you are valid to proceed. So now you have finished with your array sewing. Now, what happens before we run EDAM depends which path we're going to follow. If you are a system resource, your options are, if the obligation comes from an EDAM resource, you reassign your array obligation from the system resource at the GGAP to that EDAM resource. Okay? Or you can reassign it to a non-EIM BAA DGAP if it comes from outside the market footprint. Or it could be an EIM BAA DGAP if your source is in an EIM balancing authority area. So you're still using a system resource for those. Now, it is also possible that you leave some of or all of your array obligation at the same system resource you used at the GGAP to pass your monthly sewing. Why you do that? Maybe you still don't know the source of the energy. And by the day ahead time frame, it's okay if you don't know it. You can still use the GGAP to bid in the day ahead market. You just have to complete this array obligation reassignment before we run real time. Okay, so that's also possible. The path for the TGs is a little bit different because this is resource specific, right? There's no GGAP involved. So you can reassign the obligation to an EDAM physical resource or to a TG at the EIM BAA custom GAP, all right? Which could be the same one that you used in the monthly sewing if you were planning to supply from that EIM BAA and you know it already a month ahead, then you can use that registered TG in your monthly sewing, and then it carries through to day ahead, you bid in day ahead. The same thing for a non-EIM BAA DGAP. If you plan to bring the array obligation from a non-EIM BAA, you use that TG at the custom gap of that non-EIM BAA. You saw it in the monthly array, carries through in the day ahead, you bid that resource in the day ahead. So these are the choices of the day ahead array obligation reassignment. And we'll walk through each path. But before that, I want to show you the reassignment before the Western energy imbalance market, before we run the market. So at this point, there may be additional array obligation reassignment if the source is in an EIM BAA. So if it is in a non-EIM BAA, you may have already reassigned that before we run the day-ahead market. You don't need to reassign anything else. It stays there. If you reassign in the day-ahead market before the day-ahead market to an EDAM resource, again, you don't have to do anything. It carries through in real time. But if you used a system resource at an EIM BAA gap in the day ahead because that's where your source is, now, before we run real time, you have to reassign it to the physical resource in that EIM BAA because it participates in the real-time market. So if it's outside the market, it stays where it is. If it's day ahead, if it's EDAM, you already did it. If it's EIM, you have to do another step here to reassign it to the EIM physical resource. Similar process for the TG at the custom gap. If you have already sewn it at the custom gap that you plan to bring the energy, either in the day ahead or in real time, you don't have to reassign anything, it just stays through, you just have to bid it. You have the ability, though, to change the array obligation reassignment process and use a different CGAP with a different TG. It has to be on the same intertie because we already validated that you have make on that intertie. So you have the flexibility to change your reassignment process as long as you stick to the same tie that you pass the validation for the MIC. So this is a generic process, and as I promised, we'll walk through each path separately. So let me see if you have some generic questions on this process before we go to details.
I'm seeing a couple hands raised online. First, we have Tong Wu. Go ahead, Tong.
Your TG, my understanding is that can be a collection of generators, but the generator distribution factors have to be fixed. They cannot change. And this may not work for WAPA in this scenario. We have a collection of hydro generators, and we intend to use generators to provide resource adequacy to our customers inside California ISO. And we will dispatch these generators based on operation needs. It includes like environmental requirements because water management restrictions. We cannot give you a fixed percentage, but this collection of generators together will provide the RA, would honor the total amount. But at any hour, the dispatch of generators will not follow a fixed distribution. So I wonder how you can accommodate that. What's your suggestion?
Yes, Tom, thank you. Let me get a little bit more information. You're focusing on the TG because you're focusing on flexible array provision, maybe?
Could it be flexible RA? Could at this point, just what if just the regular RA? Let's say just regular RA, make it simpler.
Because the example is simplified a lot if it's generic array, because you simply use a system resource at the bank dig up to bid in the day ahead, right? And to fulfill your generic array obligation. Now, before bank joins EDAM, you can leave that for real time because, you have to transfer now the array obligation from that system resource to the physical resources. There may be 3 of them, as you mentioned. So you transfer the array obligation to each one of those resources, so you can specify in the array obligation reassignment the specific percentages for each hour of the day that you want to do that. That's flexible. It's not fixed because we're not defining a custom gap for it, for this cluster of resources. So the array obligation reassignment from a single system resource to multiple physical resources has its own specification per resource. So it's very flexible. That solves your problem. When it comes to TG, the TG is really a resource-specific representation of your generating resource behind it. So if you have multiple resources, the recommendation that we discussed this with the RA team is to register different TGs for each of these generators, and then you transfer the array obligation from each TG to the specific generating resource. But this is mainly for provision of flexible array, which you can do until bank joins. Let me see. No, you cannot do it before.
But we don't intend to do it before bank joins. We just, today we just use resource. If before bank joins, it's just import resource. There's no need to map this, right, until bank joins.
Let's see. You're required to bid from these physical resources in the real-time market because self-schedule or base schedule is not going to cut it for flexible array, correct? You need to have an economic bid. The economic bid on these physical resources.
Today, Tong, I don't think you're providing flex.
No, I'm not.
We're not providing
generic
flex,
right?
System resource.
Yeah, just generic. My focus is generic, but in the future, it's possible if it's convenient to provide flex. But at this point, it's just the system RA. If it's a system RA, you're saying we don't need to do all of these. We can just map system resource to a bank DGAP. That's all. There's no need to map it to a specific generator. Is that what you're saying?
In the day-ahead market, yeah, you just use a system resource at the bank DGAP to meet your array obligation. Let's say the array obligation is 100 megawatts, and then let's say the schedule clears at 100 megawatts in the day-ahead market. Now we go to EIM. You basically need to specify base schedules from these 3 different resources to come up to the 100 megawatt total. And you can specify in CERA the array obligation reassignment from the 100 megawatt system resource to any kind of combination of megawatts for these individual EIM resources that adds up to 100 megawatts. And you can do this with different allocation for every hour of the day. So that's quite flexible. That solves your issue of providing generic array. I was concerned a little bit with the TG with flexible array because I'm glad to hear that you're not doing that today because it's going to have a limitation going with EDAM that requires economic bids in the market. Yeah.
So after bank joins EDAM, if we offer system RA, do we need to do the matching in real time to each individual generator?
We'll explain it through the scenarios here, but just really quick, essentially you transfer your array obligation from the system resource at the GGAP. Before we run EDAM, you transfer it to those individual EDAM resources now when bank joins EDAM. And again, the same process, you can specify the array obligation allocation differently for each hour of the day for these three resources. So it's flexible, so you're not locked into some fixed distribution factors, okay?
But then things may change between the day ahead and real time as well. You know, day ahead schedule, we may say, okay, it is going to be cumbersome. You know, every hour we have to specify which generator is responsible for how many megawatts of RA. And then going to real time, all of a sudden, the distribution could change because some generators need to generate more or less, actually. So that will need to change again. Is that the kind of a recommendation? The convenient way is that we don't have to map this. Just the total amount would match the total RA obligation.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand, Tom, but we need to enforce the must offer obligation for the reasons that I mentioned earlier at the resource, at the physical resource, so that we make sure that that physical resource does make its capacity available in the market for the benefit of not only the participant and the load serving entity that has the array, but also mainly also for the EDAM entity for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, because you will be using an RSC eligible transfer to tag this to the California ISO. So EDAM entity wants to make sure that you're going to bid your obligation to meet that RSC additional requirement that is assuming from the ISO through the RSC eligible transfer. So we provide the ability to do that and the flexibility to do it differently. It's ours if you so desire. And we'll explain here that if that specific allocation is fixed for the month, then you only need to submit it once, and then it carries through from day to day to day until you change it. So you're in control of this. You know, if you have some specific allocation between these two resources to meet your array obligation, you just specify it once. If it changes day in, day out, you can still change it. And CIRA will provide an interface that you can use to do that, not different than what you're using today to provide your array obligation to CIRA.
Can you
Tom, we're going to have to move
of
on so we can hear from a few others. We're trying to cap it at 2 questions max. Sorry about that.
All right. Okay.
Thank
all
you
right.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Next, we have a comment from the question in the comments from Kevin at SCE asking, does non-resource specific generic gap reassignment to the D gap level suffice to be relieved of RAIM, or does it need to be reassigned to specific physical resources?
Yeah, it depends where these specific physical resources reside. If they're EDAM resources, you have to do the reassignment before day ahead. If they are EIM resources, you have to do this reassignment definitely before real time. And if there are resources outside of the market, you can do the reassignment the day ahead and then carries through to real time. So it really depends, and depends on the different branches of these figures that we'll walk through in the next few slides. So you'll have your answer in that process.
Thank you. Next, we have a hand raised from Mohan Nirula. Go ahead, Mohan. We can't hear you too well. Can you get a little bit closer to your mic, please?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my question here is on the paths SRR gap, third row on the top. So it seems like the SR at gap there is no need to reassign RA obligation, right? from month ahead and day ahead and even the real time? Because you're going to use the same SR resource at GGAP. If we're going to use the same resource, then there is no need to reassign RA obligation. Is that correct understanding?
Partially true only for the day-ahead market, because that system resource at the GGAP can participate in the day-ahead market, and we expect it to if you don't reassign the obligation to meet your RA requirements. But it cannot participate in real time. As we said yesterday, GGAP is not a valid scheduling location for real time. You actually have to buy back your schedule at the GGAP. So therefore, you must reassign it before real time. Otherwise, you will see a REM assessment for it.
Okay, so how do we need to allocate a resource, physical resource for that?
Yeah, which is not different to the process today, because today when you're providing array import at the ISO, you have to have some resource behind it to get the energy by real time when real time comes. So it's not changed. It's just putting in a process here to declare which is that resource before we run real time. Right?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mohan. Next, it looks like we have a hand raised from Steve Greenleaf. Steve, could you please keep it to one more question, and then we're going to continue on the discussion.
Yeah, I will. Thanks. Steve Greenleaf, Brookfield. If you can go back a slide, and it's following up actually on the last question. And George, I think it should be clear as far as the RA obligation reassignment. If you're registered on in the month ahead as a system resource in the GGAP, I would hope there's some kind of in the systems where it could automatically flow through if you're going to use that GGAP anyway for the day ahead market. So
yes, that's true for the day-ahead market, because if you don't reassign the obligation, the system will assume that you leave it at the GGAP, right? So silently assumes that you're going to bid now that GGAP in the day-ahead market. That's your obligation. You have to bid it, otherwise you'll get a RAIM assessment on it, right? And then before real time, you have to reassign the obligation, because you cannot bid the GGAP resource in real time.
Understood. Yeah, I was talking about day ahead. And then the other flavor, and you may have addressed this yesterday, but say in real time, you intend to source your import from a system sale. Say you want to purchase a system sale from BPA. Would you use the BPA DGAP to represent that system sale, or would that have to be represented as a custom gap?
When you say custom gap, this is generic array, right?
It is, yes.
Okay, so you're using a system resource at the GGAP to, at the intertie that you want to bring it in, to pass MIC and the validation so that your array showing month ahead is valid. And then before we run the ahead market, you can reassign the obligation from that system resource at the GGAP to another system resource that you have registered at the same intertie with the EIMBA DGAP where your system sale is coming from.
Okay, so in this case, the
We're going to have
BPA.
to move on to, we have one final question. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, yeah, it was really, it's really in the real time when you want to say, okay, I bid at the GGAP and day ahead, that's been accepted. Now in real time, specify a source, want to specify BPA system sale as the source. And I think you just said, George, you can point to the BPA EIM DGAP in that instance.
That's what you do in the day ahead. In real time, you need to specify the actual physical resource or resources in BPA that will be providing the array obligation. So you cannot just say it's a system sale. In real time, we need to know where it's coming from, because we will be dispatching those resources and we will be observing the must offer obligation for these resources to actually bid and participate in the real time market, right?
Okay, and I appreciate that. And maybe it's something I need to follow up with my team, but my definition of a system sale from Bonneville is they're not pointing to specific resources. It's from it's power provided by BPA from all the resources, which in my mind is equivalent to the DGAP, but
So Steve, I think BPA in this particular case has an aggregated resource that they're using to be dispatched to resolve these things. But if we can do is get it in comments what it is your concern is, and we'll dig into it more deeply after we read your comment.
Okay, will do. Thanks, James and George.
Yes, Steve, I believe you'll agree that when we run the real-time market, we'll have to have a representation, a physical representation where the energy comes. We don't have in the system something that is a system sale from BPA. So yes, if they're using an aggregated resource, which is probably one of the aggregated hydro resources, you just specify that resource ID.
Okay, maybe that works, and we'll give it some further thought. But thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We have one final question, and then we're going to take a quick 10-minute break so folks in the room can grab a quick bite to eat. So we'll take the final question from Jamie Rose Gannon. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit, and this is maybe something, that can't be answered on the spot here, but I just wanted to kind of raise it. So for the CPUC LSEs, unspecified imports, which is largely what we're talking about here, they have a certain bidding requirement, and the bidding requirement is, they either have to self-schedule or they could bid, economically, or they have to bid economically below zero. I'm wondering how this bidding requirement is going to interact with the changes that are being proposed here. And maybe we could take this, maybe Kaisa could take this back and we can have an offline conversation. I just am a little confused about the current, bidding requirements for unspecified imports and these changes that are happening.
Yeah, so at a high level, basically any resource, either intertie resource or a physical resource in a BAA that receives an RA obligation through the reassignment process, it has now an obligation to participate in the market, whatever that market is, day ahead or real time, and the participation is enforced by our cyber rules that basically require bids in the market from any resource that has an RA obligation. There is an exception for intertie resource, of course, as it is today. So, but the requirement to tag these schedules to the ISO still remains as it is today. So you'll be able to see that coming through the tags like today.
Thank you. Next, we'll be taking a 10-minute break so that folks in the room can grab a quick bite to eat in the back there. And then please bring it back to your seat and we'll continue working through the discussion. So we'll return in about 10 minutes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Please get back to your seats and grab some food. We're going to get back on this topic with George.
Hello, everyone. So we're going to be a little bit brief going through the specific slides that walk through each of these paths to get to the details that we want to convey to you. So let's go. All right. Okay, so this is for day ahead. If you want to reassign to EDAM resources, as we said, it's different, which is the source. The path for the SCAP, you reassign from the SR at the GGAP, the specific EDAM resource. Now you have the obligation to bid that EDAM resource in the market. Otherwise, you will be assessed RAIN, of course. And if it's a TG, the same thing. You can reassign from the TG at the custom gap, which was probably an EDAM custom gap. You reassign out the physical resource, which you have to bid in the market. Once you make this reassignment to EDAM resource, you don't have to reassign again for real time, can stick through.
George, can I bring a little little qualification here. When we say physical resources, these are the market resources that the BA has defined to be able to participate in the market. They don't have to be like if I have an aggregated resource, it's not the underlining resources below it. It's the aggregated resource you're reassigning to.
You're using the resource ID in the master file to identify the resource that is participating in the market. It could be an aggregated resource of many physicals. That's what James points out. So whatever is registered in the master file as a resource ID, that's the one that our system sees. We have here. Okay. All right. Of course, you have to bid these resources, these EDAM resources also in the day-ahead market, but it's sufficient to put a self-schedule to match whatever clears in the day-ahead that fulfills your array obligation, and then you'll be okay. You'll not be assessed RAIM in real time. All right, a little bit of the details for the day-ahead reassignment. The reassignment must take place by 9 a.m. before the day ahead in Sierra. All right, and if your reassignment is the same every day in the month, you only have to submit it for the first day, and then it persists through the rest of the month until you perhaps change it. So we have this facilitation to make it simple. When you're reassigned to EDAM resources, the SC may be different for the EDAM resource than the SC that has the array obligation at the system resource at the GIGA, because apparently you're having some deals, getting the energy from some resource, from EDAM resource. So the SC may be different, but they have to approve the reassignment. And these SCs now, they have the obligation to bid these resources in the day-ahead market. Otherwise, they will be assessed RAIM because they assumed the array obligation through the reassignment process. It's now their obligation. And if anything is left unassigned at the GCAP, that system resource at the GCAP must bid this unassigned application the day ahead. It can participate in the day ahead, and this way you can avoid RAIM penalties, but then you have to complete the reassignment process before real time. If it's an EIM resource, the process is pretty similar, with the understanding that you can use a system resource at an EIM BAA DGAP now to participate in the day ahead, okay? Which then you have to reassign it further in real time. You have to go to that EIM resource that has the obligation. Before you go to real time, because the EIM resource does not participate in the real time in day ahead, you can participate at the system resource at the EIM BA DGAP, and you can use the same resource to participate in HASP. That's what we said yesterday. So you can participate with that resource in HASP, and the physical resource that you reassign the obligation can simply base schedule your HASP schedule after HASP, and this way you don't have a RAIM assessment. So you have to bid both resources because we close the real-time market by T-75, and the reassignment process has to complete by T-90 in real time. So, yes. So you submit two bids, one bid for the Intertie resource at the EIM BA DGAP, another bid at the resource ID, the EIM resource ID in that EIM BAA. Those bids are used for different markets. The Intertie resource bid is used in HASP. The bid at the EIM resource is used also in FMM and NRTD, but it can simply be base scheduled to match your HASP schedule. So, we'll skip this because it's the same with what we said before. When you reassign from one Intertie resource to another Intertie resource, like when you go from the SR at the GCAP to SR at an EIM BAA DGAP, use the same Intertie. So those intertie resources have to use the same intertie because that's the one that you pass the array monthly showing with the MIC that you have secured on that intertie. So the reassignment in real time happens by T-90. Okay, you submit the information to CIRA in a way similar to what you submit today for array substitution, but it's not array substitution, it's array obligation reassignment. Again, we have this facilitation that if the reassignment to the AIM resources is the same for the entire month, you use the same resources to provide array obligation, you just do it once for the first trading day in the month for each hour, and then it sticks through, it persists for the rest of the month until perhaps you want to change it, and then you resubmit your array obligation reassignment. Similar to the day-ahead process, if you assign to EIM resources, the SCs may be different than the SC that makes the reassignment, but they must approve the reassignment because now the array obligation becomes their array obligation, so they have to bid these resources in the real-time market to avoid drain. So they can bid it for HASP, as we said earlier, at the intertie resource, the original SC, and these resources, the SCs for the IM resources, they can simply base schedule to match the HASP schedule, and this way they are not assessed drain because the base schedule is already fulfilling the obligation. That's for generic array. Of course, for flexible array, you have to economically bid. You have to provide flexibility, which is not possible for resources in EIM. Let's see now. The path for the TG is pretty similar, but there are some advantages because the TG is resource specific, so you can already have set it up to show it in the monthly array from the custom gap where it's actually going to come. So you don't have to continue reassigning unless you want to change it to a different custom gap. If it's the same custom gap that you're going to use for the entire month, you show it in the monthly array showing and it sticks through, you just bid it in the market. So we're going to skip those for the TG. They're much simpler. They still give you the ability to change to a different TG with a different custom gap as long as you use the same intertie again. But if it's the same, you know your array provision is coming from, let's say, an EIM resource. You're using the TG without the EIM BAA custom gap in the monthly showing. You let it run through in day ahead. You make a reassignment before real time to point out that that EIM resource. You still bid the intertie resource in HASP, and that EIM resource simply base schedules to match. Let's see. So I believe we're done. We want to open for questions.
We have a few questions online. First, we have a question from Bonnie Blair. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Bonnie?
Hi, George, can you hear me?
Yes.
It looks like you got muted again.
I did, sorry, thank you. Forgive me if you said this at the beginning and it got past me. In order to do a reassignment for an import RA resource, is it allowed only if the original resource is unavailable? Or
no?
Okay, so it's at will.
Yeah. It's a more generalized process that is similar to the. We're using the same way to indicate it to CIRA, like what you use today for array substitution. However, array substitution is prompted by having an outage for the array that has the resource that has the array obligation, and then you substitute it with another. We simply leverage that process, but the array obligation is more generic way that basically you reassign the array obligation from an intertie resource to either another intertie resource or to a resource ID within an EDAM BAA or with an EIM BAA. So it's just the technology process is the same, but the outcome is different. There are different expectations for it.
Right, and it's basically discretionary with somebody. Maybe it's a contractual thing. In other words, maybe the LSE can decide for some reason they want to do it, or if contractually permitted, the resource might decide. Is that correct?
Not entirely. So the scheduling coordinator that showed the array obligation in the monthly showing, they do have an obligation now with this reassignment process to reassign the array obligation to either an EDAM resource or an EIM resource or another intertie resource from a non-EIM BA DGAP, depending on the situation. But they have to complete this reassignment process so that when we run the market, we have specificity on where the energy for that array obligation is coming from in the market.
No, yeah, I follow that, but just the decision about whether to reassign or not reassign.
That's what I'm saying. It's not really an optional thing. You have to reassign. There are some situations that you don't have to reassign. For example, if you reassign the day ahead to an EDAM resource, you don't have to reassign again. That stays for real time as well. If you reassign before the day ahead market to an intertie from a non-EIM BAA, you don't have to reassign again. That stays on for real time. But there are also situations that you must reassign. For example, if it's an EIM resource, you have to reassign to another intertie resource from the system resource at the GGAP with that EIM BAA DGAP before day ahead. And then in real time, before real time, you have to reassign from that resource to the EIM resource or resources that will provide the energy. So that is not optional. This is required, but it's a requirement that exists today. If your source for the array obligation is an EIM resource, it is expected today that you will have that resource participating in the market and tag the schedule to the ISO. So we're simply formalizing an existing requirement so that the entity, as I mentioned at the beginning, is reassured that they're not going to be left hanging the RSC obligation that was transferred to them, and they are reasonably assured that the resources that must cover that RSC obligation will be in the market and they will participate in the market. That's all.
Okay, I think I'm following. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Thanks. And we have a question in the chat before we take the others online. We have a question from Patrick Cunningham asking, can unspecified imports follow all these new rules with a self-schedule, or does it need to be an economic bid?
Right. So it depends on the situation, right? For example, for generic array can be met with a self-schedule or with a base schedule from an EIM resource that bridges a self-schedule at the intertie with that EIM BAA DGAP. So in that case, a self-schedule is sufficient or a base schedule is sufficient. Now, this assumes that the intertie resource schedule cleared in the market the entire array obligation. If there is some portion of the array obligation that didn't clear the day-ahead market, or the let's talk about the day-ahead market, the remaining array obligation now needs to have representation in the next market. So just base scheduling to that resource is not sufficient. You have to provide either an additional self-schedule to cover the additional array obligation that did not clear the day-ahead market, or an economic bid, in the case of flexible array. So it depends on the situation.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Eric Johnson. Go ahead, Eric. You might be double muted if you're speaking, Eric. We're going to try unmuting you one more time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I had two questions. One, this whole reassignment process, if I'm importing like Hoover, and as my import right now, my resource says it's a unit contingent resource, and I'm bringing that in. does my scheduling of the unit change? Or will I have to then
Is that
go
a
back?
dynamic schedule today from Hoover?
No,
Yes. You're using a TG for it, right?
correct.
Okay. And you provide both flex and generic array with this?
No, we're using just generic on it.
Just generic array, okay. So yes, there are some changes for generic array. If it's a TG, you can also do it with that. So let's say that TG is registered in the master file and you're using a custom gap that points to Hoover. That's my assumption. If it's not, you can change that to align it. In your case, using a TG for a dynamic schedule, that's very convenient because you can show that TG in the monthly showing and you don't have to reassign it. Just carries through all the markets, but make sure you bid it in the day ahead market to at least clear your array obligation, and then you can self-schedule in real time. Or if it doesn't clear fully in the day ahead, just bid the remaining in real time so that you don't get RAIM assessment. You know that already, you're doing that. So no change. It's pretty simple in your particular case.
Okay, I was just trying to make sure of that because it sounded like I needed to have G gaps, D gaps, L gaps, and a whole bunch of other gaps.
Yeah, that's for system resources. If you're using a TG, the advantage of the TG is that it has a custom gap, which actually points to the resource that you're using to fill the energy from. So it's already resource specific, so you don't have to be bothered with the specific reassignment process. That all it's trying to do is get specificity on the resource that provides the energy as you walk through the various markets. In your case, it's already specific from the monthly array showing, so you're done with that.
And then if I have another, like, no, I think that covers it. That's fine. I don't want to complicate it and scare myself. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Next, we have a hand raised from Tong Wu. Go ahead, Tong.
Tong Wu from WAPA. When you map the system resource to a generator or reassignment from the SR to a generator, is that one-to-one relationship or can it be a one-to-many relationship? Meaning that if you have one import RA, you can map that to several generators.
Understand the question. Yeah, if you're, let's say in the day ahead, you reassign from the system resource at the GGAP to a system resource at the bank DGAP, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in real time, you have to reassign from that Intertie resource to specific EIM resources. It's not one resource. You can have many resources and you specify the reassignment percentage for each one of them. So in the example that we had earlier, if you have 100 megawatt obligation and you scheduled it in the day ahead, right? It cleared, let's say, the day ahead at the EIM, at the system resource at the bank DGAP. Now you just have to reassign it to the individual resources in bank that provide this obligation, and you can split it any way you want for each hour. As we mentioned it, let's say you have a distribution 20, 30, 50, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you simply, to fulfill your array obligation and avoid rain on these resources, all you need to do is base schedule 20, 30, 50 to match your day ahead array scheduled obligation of 100 megawatts, and you're done.
Okay, so it's a one-to-many relationship. That's good.
For the system resource, for the TG is a little different, Tom, but I'm not going to say because you didn't ask that.
I'm not looking at the TG because TG you have to have fixed distribution. I'm just talking about regular mapping.
Yes.
And another question is, can the system resource be mapped to an inter-SC trade, say a physical inter-SC trade?
You mean outside of the array process? This is the inter-SC trade is a mechanism to have trades of energy between scheduling coordinators. It's a little bit unrelated topic. So you're asking if I can use an Intertie resource in an inter-SC trade? I believe you can, right, James?
Yes.
Okay, so RA can be provided through a inter-assay trade. Is that?
Well, that's why I did say, that's why I did say this is a separate mechanism that facilitates trades between scheduling coordinators. It's not designed for the array provision. The array provision, you have to go through the array process. The system doesn't know that you're going to provide the arrays through an inter-assay trade. You have to really use this reassignment process to tell the system that you're going to provide array from this resource. The inter-assay trade is something different, which you can have on the side, but it doesn't factor into the array process.
So I'm not sure I got the answer. Yes or no? Can I use IST to support
Yes,
array?
you can use an inter-assay trade. You cannot use the inter-assay trade specifically to meet array requirements. You still have to follow the array process we lay out here. James, you want to?
Yeah. So Tong, we are not expanding the RA process to include inter-assay trades in here. You can do an inter-assay trades between two parties, I don't know, NCPA inside the ISO and yourself at an intertie location. That does not impact the RA obligation. Your RA obligation is still going to be based upon whatever you were shown from the LSC.
I wasn't thinking about treating the obligation. I'm just thinking about reassignment. To reassign import RA resource to an inter-assay trade. And then that inter-assay trade can be supported by a collection of generators if it's a physical IST.
So if you do a reassignment of the system resource to a physical resource within your balancing authority area, you can submit an inter-assay trades. They are not linked from the
So basically, your answer is no, right? Inter-assay trade, physical inter-assay trade cannot be used as a physical resource to support RA in real time.
My answer is your inter-assay trades does not inform our market of your RA obligation on that physical resource.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Tong. Next, we have a hand raised from Mohan Nirula. Go ahead, Mohan.
Yeah, Mohan Nirula with CDWR. So I'm coming back to the same SR at GGAP. It seems like we must change the resource ID when we reassign RA obligation, right?
Yes, it's a different intertie resource that you use to reassign to, because you're using the SR at the GGAP in the monthly sewing, and then you have to reassign it to the appropriate resource for use in the day-ahead market, right?
Yeah.
So it will be a different resource that you use to reassign to.
If the resource that I used in the monthly plan still represents those resources behind the original, RA resource, why can't we use the same resource again in the reassignment process? Because it's going to be, yeah.
Yeah, because we don't know which are these resources. You don't declare it in the monthly process. All we see is a system resource at the GGAP, which is not resource specific. We don't know what's behind it. You have to tell us. Let's say it's EDAM resources. You have to tell us before the day-ahead market, oh, these are the resources that are behind the system resource at the GGAP. We don't know it just because you're using a system resource at the GGAP. It's not resource specific, so we have no knowledge. You have to let us know.
Okay, so let's say if the RA import is coming from LADWP, so we need to find a physical resource ID, and that should be in the ISO master file?
Yes, it has to be a registered resource in the master file.
If LADWP doesn't have that registered with the ISO master file, then we have to now start doing that?
Let's see, how do you do it today? If you're bringing energy from LA to meet an array obligation for a California LSC, aren't you using already an Intertie resource today?
Yeah, we have an Intertie resource ID. Yes.
All right, so make sure that Intertie resource ID, when we roll out EDAM, has the location of the LADWP PAA gap, DGAP, all right? And then use this resource to reassign from the system resource of the GGAP, reassign it to this one before we run day ahead market, as long as LADWP is still outside of EDAM. And then before real time, reassign again to the specific LADWP resources that will be providing the array obligation behind that import, okay?
Okay, so there needs to be a physical resource ID should be in master file. That's what you're saying.
Yes, still the physical resources that LADWP will have registered in the master file already. Yeah, we need to know where the energy is coming from. And as I said earlier, you can specify that for the first day of the month. If it stays the same, you don't have to respecify again. The system will assume the same as allocation and assignment. And if you need to change it, you can come to SIRA before that real-time market and specify it again any way you want. And it sticks from that point on. So it's a persistent information that comes in.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have a hand in the room. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Matthew Daces. And I think just two questions for the tie generators, for the TGs.
For which
The
TGs,
yes,
the
the
tie
TGs.
gens, yes.
Yes, so for that one, I guess when looking at the monthly process, right, going into the showing, we would say that we're selecting a particular TG as serving the RA obligation. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then for the reassignment, I guess my question would be then, it's CAISO, so let's say that I own a generator at Meade and Palo, right? And I chose the TG at Palo. So would I be able to reassign to the TG at Meade so long as I have transmission to deliver it to Palo to meet the obligation?
So because the array monthly sewing is already done and we have already validated that you have MIC at Palo Verde and PV West, it's not advisable to change to another intertie. You can change to another TG at the PV West that has a different SIGAP, but it's recommended to use the same intertie because we cannot revalidate that you have MIC on the other intertie. That process is done already.
Understood. And I'm thinking is if I had the generator meet and purchase transmission outside of CAISO, would you say that as long as it's being delivered to Palo, is that that's kind of my question?
That will be part of your MIC evaluation for PV West, where you're going to show you must have MIC at PV West to use that intertie. You have to have MIC at Meade to bring it from Meade. So in the monthly array process, you have to maybe you can use both. You say I have MIC here, I have MIC there, I have one TG here, one TG there to meet my array obligation, and then you come real time and reassign it. But the only time in the process that we're actually checking for the MIC is in the array monthly sewing. So after that, use the same intertie or interties if you're showed more interties. Okay.
I just think is if I had transmission external to CAISO, that's my question.
External transmission to come to PV West?
Correct.
Then you use the PV West intertie.
Yeah, I think we still want to use the PV West, but as we don't have the source anymore, let's say at Palo, say it trips offline, and now we still have a
Or
generator.
use another resource, make sure you use another resource that uses the same intertie, the PV West intertie.
In that scenario, if it happened today, would you do a substitution?
And if we are able to, yes, but we would try to do that at the same intertie.
Okay. So I would recommend at this point, I would use the substitution process for that and not the reassignment process, because then we can know that that resource is on outage and you are replacing it with the Meade resource.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Which wouldn't be different than what you do today, basically.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Taking a final look for questions, we had received another hand from Steve Greenleaf. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Steve Greenleaf, Brookfield. Couple quick questions. First, generally, does the ISO expect making modification? Are you going to roll out changes to the SIRA functionality? Or George, I think you said, it was similar to kind of the substitution, but you're not expecting to use that same functionality, are
you? We are actually leveraging the same functionality, but we're going to build some enhancements to SIRA to handle this array reassignment process.
Okay, that's helpful. And I think part of that, like I think Sarah does today, would be kind of like validation, and not maybe validation is the wrong word, kind of confirmation of changes made, since there is a downstream impact as to the RAIM evaluation. So that would be helpful. Do you know when you're going to roll those changes out? Or?
Steve, this is Khalid. We are working on changing this. We are expecting it probably beginning of the year to start. Maybe we will try to also do some kind of a simulation or testing with the market participants on that one. But right now we're looking at the beginning of 2026.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Steve, we're in the process of finalizing the business requirements for these changes. I think we're almost done. We're just wrapping it up right now. So then we're going to proceed to the next step. So yeah, we're working on it as we go.
Okay.
But
And
it's
one last question.
Yeah, it's going to be a different model than the substitution. It is called reassignment, and it is actually simpler than the substitution in the rules that are involved, but it's going to be a different model that will be visible to the participant.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And then secondly, can you, pre these changes, can you remind me the specific tagging? I thought there were specific tagging deadlines in EDAM. And I mean, with respect to the reassignment, I assume there's an expectation on tag modification between day ahead and real time to kind of conform to this. But can you just remind me on the tagging deadline?
Yeah. So we're not actually changing the tagging requirements. Maybe you've been probably doing this already. In the tag for an intertie resource that is used for array, specify the physical resource behind it in the tag. And some participants, I believe they do that already. So we expect to see it in the tag, and you want it to be in the tag because that's how you show to your LSC or CPUC that you have fulfilled your array obligation. The tag is the key, and the tag will show the physical resource where the energy is coming from. If it is an EDAM resource or an EIM resource.
Okay. And I was just trying to think generally back to the EDAM timelines, like as far as the tagging requirement by X deadline after the close of the day ahead market. Was that, or is it just prior to the real-time market? I can't remember.
We don't change those timelines for the tags. Of course, the earlier you can submit them, the happier everybody is. But I think the dead drop time for the tags for intertie schedules is, I believe, still T-20.
Okay.
but we want, well, according to, you can do it all the way until there. Same, yeah, we don't change the tagging interfaces.
Okay, thanks, George. I mean, yeah, that's the standard tag deadline. I was thinking there was something different in the EDAM tariff, but I'm probably misremembering. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We have one final question online from Ryan Greiser. Go ahead, Ryan.
Question. My question was on the reassignment timeline. I'm seeing on some slides, like the one that we're looking at here, that the RA obligation reassignment needs to occur by 9 a.m. before EDAM. And then on other slides, I saw a reference that the RA obligation reassignment happens by T-90 before the EIM. So I was just hoping you could help me understand the difference between the circumstances and what scenarios the T-90 is relevant to.
Absolutely. So the 9 a.m. deadline is for the day ahead reassignment, and the T-90 deadline is for the real-time reassignment. In some cases, you only have to do the day ahead reassignment. If it goes to an EDAM resource, then that carries through. You don't have to reassign again. Or if it goes to a system resource for from a non-EIM BAA, again, it doesn't need reassignment in real time. You could carry through from day ahead. In some cases, you have to make a reassignment also before real time. That's the case that the source is in an EIM BAA. So you reassign to a system resource from that EIM BAA dig up in the day ahead by 9 a.m. And then you reassign further from that resource to the EIM resources behind it that will provide the energy before T-90 in before real time. So these are the specifics for the reassignment and the timeline.
Thank you, Ryan. Not seeing any other questions at this time. George, do you have any final thoughts before I turn it over to Joanne as we take its next steps?
My final thought is that now I'm going to turn into a pumpkin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George. Nice work. We don't want you a pumpkin. We need you, George Angelides, professor on all this stuff. So Joanne Serini here from the CAISO. I just wanted to reiterate and actually respond to another thing, to Steve Greenleaf's question regarding CIRA. Any changes to our applications, we will be providing some training. So look out for announcements on training on various applications and topics over the next few months. I just want to reiterate what I mentioned earlier about submitting questions. So the city tool is available to you to submit questions, but we're also going to be opening up our comments tool that you're typically familiar with for policy initiatives. So we'll send a link out to that tool with the repository and template for actually submitting questions on these topics from yesterday and today. We will then collate all the questions we receive there, plus the questions in city, and we will publish a public FAQ document. And then stay tuned for some follow-up calls where we'll go over the questions and just answer more questions, because I know there's a lot of questions. We want to make sure we get to all of them and get everybody comfortable with the material. So stay tuned for the follow-ups. And I just saw Steve's hand go up, so I'm assuming, Steve, did you have a question for me?
I did. Thanks, Joanne. Just real quick, maybe this is an obvious question, but when you're obviously we're availing ourselves of submitting questions to city. I will say it's a slow slog on
Understood. Yes.
Getting responses. But if we did it through the
comment tool,
comment tool, thank you. The CAISO will publish all the questions publicly, or obviously
Yes.
city you can submit
Yes.
very confidential questions, so to speak, or information with confidential information.
That's correct.
The expectation on the comment tool, since it would be published automatically, is generic questions. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, so we don't publish the comments that are coming in automatically publicly. So we will review them, and then we will go through and we will consolidate questions that are applicable to everybody on our public FAQ document.
Okay, but we can submit very specific.
Yes, you can, and we'll address
comment.
those, but then we'll also sort of more generically provide an answer more publicly. Does that make sense?
It does. And I guess one final thought or admonition would be, when you guys do publish the FAQs, per my earlier point, and I believe consistent with some of the comments made by Dan and Carrie over the last couple of days, it would be very helpful to kind of spell out, and George, in answering my questions, did this. It's helpful to understand roles, right? Like when something has to happen, who executes on that? Sometimes it is the EIM entity on behalf of a third party who submits something through. It's just, it would be very helpful to us to understand what exactly we have to do versus kind of what we do today and then somebody else handles. I hope that makes sense, but.
Yeah, it does, Steve. And we'll take that back and consider that for maybe one of our subsequent follow-ups to elaborate more on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Joanne,
Thank you.
maybe also helpful because this is the first time we're using the common tool to support the project implementation, that for people to put like the first, maybe at the not the head, maybe the first line, say, specific or non-public or public. If you provide that, that will help us when we reevaluate what is public and versus what is not public. If you're gonna, typically we use city tickets, like you said, Joanne, that for the project, but this, because of we're trying to address every question, we don't want to have city as a barrier. So, but just make sure that your question is identified with a qualifier, public or non-public.
So what we'll do is we have everybody's email that's attended yesterday and today. We'll send out a link to how to submit those questions. And we'll provide a little bit of detail on to help you get the right submission in. Okay?
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So that's all I have. I'll turn it back to Christina. I just want to thank the CAISO team for it's been quite a bit of material to digest. But thank you to George and the rest of the team for presenting over the past couple of days, and for all the stakeholders hanging in there with us throughout yesterday and today. And we really do appreciate all the feedback and comments. And we're certainly committed to working with all of you to work through questions, issues, and concerns. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne. I just have a couple quick announcements before we wrap up today. Here's some meetings occurring this week at the ISO, as well as comment submission deadlines. And here's some trainings occurring this week. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's session. And as a reminder, this was recorded for information purposes, and we will be posting the recording, and all materials are online on the webpage. We thank you very much for joining today and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
That concludes our conference. You may now disconnect. Thank you for using Inteller Events.